make sure we have enough time for everyone. And then if we have additional time, we can go back into networking. But really happy to have this convening here today. We've done a couple of other ones this year, one on tariffs when they were first instituted, I guess, or talked about, and then the second one on manufacturing here in the state of California. And I believe this is our third one, right? Because people are always asking, is the government going to go toward digital currency? How do you feel about Bitcoin? Will we be able to pay our bills? All these questions. So we said, why don't we convene, the experts here to talk about what is being talked about on the street, but also what is being implemented in reality. So thank you all for coming to today's hearing on blockchain and digital financial assets, state policy and finance perspectives. As California State Treasurer, I oversee the state's banking, investments, and financing programs and serve on some of the largest pension and investment boards in this country. Few technologies have generated as much interest, excitement, confusion, and debate as blockchain and digital financial assets. Many Californians have heard terms like cryptocurrency, stable coins, tokenization, digital wallets, or blockchain. Some view these technologies as transformative innovations. Others associate them with speculation, volatility, fraud, or uncertainty. And many of us just want to better understand what they actually mean and how they work. The reality is that these technologies are evolving rapidly and are increasingly intersecting with traditional finance, government services, and everyday consumer activities. California is uniquely positioned at the center of this conversation. We are home to world-leading technology companies, financial innovators, entrepreneurs, research institutions, and regulators. Decisions made here often shape national and global discussions about innovation and consumer protection. So today's hearing is designed to help the public better understand several key questions. What exactly is blockchain technology and how does it work? How do digital financial assets fit into our financial system and how do they integrate with blockchain? How are California government agencies approaching blockchain, digital assets, and related technologies? And how might these innovations affect financial institutions, investors, payment systems, and public finance in the years ahead? Our goal is not to endorse, promote, or discourage any particular technology. Rather, our goal is to provide a thoughtful, balanced, and informative discussion that helps policymakers, stakeholders, and members of the public better understand both the opportunities and the risks. We are fortunate to have an outstanding group of experts joining us today from academia, government, financial institutions, and the technology sectors. I want to thank each of the panelists for sharing their expertise and helping to advance an informed public discussion on this important topic. With that, let's begin our first panel. It is Blockchain 101, Understanding Blockchain and Digital Assets. So our first panel will provide a foundational overview of blockchain technology and digital financial assets. The discussion will help explain how these technologies work, what problems they were designed to solve, and where they may fit into the broader financial and economic landscape. Please welcome Professor Michele Neitz, professor at the University of San Francisco School of Law and former member of California's Blockchain Working Group. Also, Joe Ciccolo, executive director of the California Blockchain Advisory Commission and a longtime advisor on blockchain policy and regulatory issues, and Max Sherman, managing principal at FS Vector, who advises financial institutions, fintech companies, and digital asset firms on compliance, innovation, and regulatory strategy. Thank you all for joining us today. I understand that your panel has some slides to assist in this initial discussion, so they are up and ready for you now, and I invite each of you to walk through your respective slides to help us and the audience better understand blockchain technology and digital financial assets broadly and how the two relate to one another. Each panelist can take 5 to 10 minutes to walk through your slides. Thank you. Who's starting first? Okay.
we are. I started the center in order to do exactly what I'm doing today, which is to help educate not just law students and lawyers, but also government officials about new technologies like blockchain, AI, quantum computing, and the challenges that go along with regulating those, which I don't really have to explain to anyone in this room. So I'll move to the next slide. I'd like to start this morning on the island of Yap, which is an island in Micronesia that did not use traditional currency as we think of it. So instead, the islanders used what they called ray stones, and there's a picture of a ray stone on the slide in front of you. As you can see, these are extremely large stones, impossible to move without a lot of very heavy labor to do so. This is very different from our concept of currency, which traditionally for us has, in the West, has something like something tangible, a shell, a coin, a dollar bill, for example. Instead, on the island of Yap, dozens of ray stones are scattered around the island, and each of them belongs to a particular person or group. So how do they remember who owns every stone? Well, they keep it in their heads through basically like an oral history tradition. So if I was going to, for example, buy something from Treasurer Ma, I would, in payment, give Treasurer Ma the ray stone over there next to the palm tree. And everybody in the village would remember, okay, that ray stone that belonged to Professor Neitz now belongs to Treasurer Ma. They would update it in their heads. Now, what they would not do is go down to the title office or city hall and register ownership. Instead, there would be what we could call a decentralized system of ownership, where everybody's remembering it in their heads. And if one of us were to leave, for example, Joe, I'm going to use you. If Joe were to leave the island, that's okay. Everybody else on the island can remember. All of the villagers would update their mental records to account for a new transaction. Blockchain takes the same idea, and there are a couple of purposes here with these stones that we could use in the context of blockchain. So the first is that the stones are intangible, right? You can't hold it. I'm not actually handing the stone to Treasurer Ma. And in fact, on the island, once they were trying to move a stone via boat and it fell into the ocean, and the villagers decided, well, it's still there, even if we can't see it. That's just the ray stone at the bottom of the ocean, right? They're also decentralized. It's a decentralized system of ownership. So there's no logbook. It's that everyone agrees on who owns each stone, which means that we have consensus. So if you take this idea and you apply it to a ledger of transactions, you would have essentially a decentralized system of ownership, where for a blockchain, it would be living in computers that we call nodes that are all around the world. If one node goes down, doesn't matter. All the other nodes can retain that history, those transactions on the ledger. This can apply to all kinds of things, as I'm going to talk about. And actually, if we can move the slides forward. But there are a couple of interesting concepts that we can take out of the ray stones into blockchain. So as I said, the first is that blockchain is decentralized. And when we were in the working group, we talked a lot about the fact that California, especially, is subject to a lot of natural disasters. Having all of our records on one server or in one warehouse is probably not a great idea for California, right? We also have consensus. These changes that would occur are transparent and they happen across every node on the network. So if this was my class, I teach blockchain law, I would ask you all to log on to what we call an explorer, and we would actually be able to see Bitcoin transactions or any currency you want happening in real time. How do we make sure then that the transactions are actually valid, given that we have no city hall and there's no logbook? We actually can use cryptography. And that is where Bitcoin, which was the first cryptocurrency to incorporate these ideas into something that can be used for digital value, engaged with cryptography to be able to create these hash functions. I'm not getting into hash functions, and I am not a cryptographer, and this is blockchain 101, so we'll just leave it at that for now. Okay, next slide, please. So let's talk about the characteristics of a public blockchain. What I'm talking about here is what we would call a permissionless blockchain, meaning anybody can view it, anybody can access it. There are also private or permissioned blockchains, which is kind of like I have a number of topics today that are like blockchain 102, so I can come back and do a second round if you like. The first characteristic is this idea of it being distributed, right? Running on computers all over the world. As I've said, even if one goes down, we still have access through the other nodes. The second is the fact that it is public. Transparency is built in. So because it resides on the network and not on a single server, anybody trying to hack or to steal, for example, steal Bitcoin off the ledger, it's going to be practically impossible to do that for a couple of reasons, and the transparency is one of them. Next slide, please. So how are we able to keep this type of ledger secure without a logbook or City Hall? The answer is encryption, right? And so if you are somebody who wants to hold Bitcoin, for example, you would have a public key that would appear on the ledger. But you would also have a private key that would prove your identity and enable you to authorize the sale or purchase of a particular cryptocurrency without revealing sensitive information like my name, for example, pros and cons, right? And to not knowing who I am. Finally, you would also have an immutable transaction. And this is because blockchain, if I had my chalkboard, see, I need my tools, but if I had my chalkboard, what I would write behind me would be literally a chain of blocks, right? Even if you could change information in one block, you would have to change every block across every node in the chain. And this is not totally impossible, but computationally, it is practically impossible, which means that also is a way to secure these transactions. Next slide, please. So what is a blockchain? I often get asked, just give it to me in one sentence, right? Here's my one sentence that I actually stole from people who wrote a book called Blockchain Revolution. It is a distributed ledger representing a network consensus of every transaction that has ever occurred, right? So it is distributed, it is transparent. Because of the immutability and the transparency, it is tamper-proof. It's practically impossible to change a transaction without changing the entire blockchain. And it is consensus-based. Everyone has to agree on a particular transaction in order for it to be validated or confirmed into the blockchain. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. These are things that we could talk at more length about if there are questions about them, but I'm not going to go into detail just for time's sake on these. I've talked already about the idea of public and private keys. An important point to remember when we're talking about consumer protection is that if you lose the private key, you have lost access to your account on the ledger, or I would say to the things of value that you hold on the ledger. There are two types of wallets that enable you to have those private keys. The first one is what we call hot wallets. They're basically like almost like a brokerage account where you log in, it's connected to the internet, it's very convenient, and it's really good to have that if you want to do quick transactions. Obviously, because it's connected to the internet, it is also dangerous and can be hacked through those hot wallets. So instead, some folks like to use what they call cold wallets, which essentially look like a USB that you would basically, if you lose that, you lost it. And then there are various consensus mechanisms as well, that I'm not going to get into because I have a yellow card already. Next slide, please. Okay. What are the use cases of blockchain? Well, there's a lot beyond cryptocurrency. So today we're going to be talking mostly about crypto, but there's also the ability to use blockchain for record keeping, for supply chains. We talked about it related to voting. We decided not to use it for voting, but that's certainly a possibility. There are lots of other use cases besides cryptocurrency. Next slide, please. And now I have to do my little pitch that I always do around the fact that there are social good use cases for blockchain that I don't think get enough attention. And so I do want to make sure in my last couple of minutes here that I let folks know about these. There are a variety of different blockchain protocols that exist. So here are a couple of examples of blockchain for social good. The first is a joint collaboration between Stanford and USC. It's called the Starling Lab. Starling Lab is using the Filecoin blockchain to authenticate digital evidence. So for example, they've preserved Holocaust oral histories. They're actually documenting war crime evidence in Ukraine and other places and storing that on that decentralized ledger. The second is through the Stellar blockchain. They are using blockchain for cashless aid in unstable regions. Specifically, they have a Hope for Haiti project happening where they're distributing funds through crypto to people who are not in a position to have a bank account or it's dangerous for them to hold cash. Next slide, please. The University of Oxford has a project on through the Ripple UBRI program where they have students contributing to various economic and financial projects. So the Bank of England, for example, their digital pound project, Stable Check is an independent scorecard. And then lastly, I do have to share what we're doing at the University of San Francisco. Through the UBRI program, we had students do a hackathon for social good. And we had a ton of exciting projects coming through there, but one of them was to record air quality, especially in regions where the government may have an incentive to change what the air quality may be officially, to create a tamper-proof evidence for environmental science purposes. So my takeaway is students can help. They're very excited to work and to help, especially when it comes to government use cases and research projects, and I have access to lots of students if folks are interested. With that, I'll turn it over to my colleague. Joe?
Thank you, Treasurer Ma, and thank you to the Treasurer's Office for your hospitality today. My name is Joe Ciccolo. I'm the Executive Director of the California Blockchain Advocacy Coalition, or CBAC for short. We're a nonprofit trade association representing the interests of the crypto, Web3, and blockchain industry here in California. So as my first slide might indicate, I'm going to start off this policy discussion with a discussion of the Digital Financial Assets Law, or DFAL for short. We can go to the next slide. First, a little bit of background. So I got a lot of questions. We're talking about this framework here in California. We're suddenly starting to regulate digital assets, is what I hear. But this has been a long and circuitous route to get there. There's been a lot of legislative attempts, again, not for a lack of trying. In that, we've seen a lot of market volatility, public policy considerations at the federal level, which continue to evolve to this day, and a lot of lessons learned from industry feedback and market events. I would go to the next slide. So a little bit of a timeline here. I don't want to get too into details of each piece of legislation, but again, starting back in 2015, California at that time taking up potential legislative oversight of digital assets with AB 1326. Ultimately, it was withdrawn. There was some concerns about broad language and some potential exposure for open source development within that bill. Fast forward a more arduous attempt here with AB 2269, Grayson bill. It passed through the legislature, but ultimately was vetoed by the governor, who cited some considerations relative to timing, cost, and at that time, federal policy alignment. So I'm sharing this history to talk about how we've overcome these challenges and the difficulty in regulating an emerging and a fast evolving technology, right? We're writing the rule book as we're evolving and building this industry, and it can be very difficult, all while trying to balance innovation and consumer protection, something we take very seriously here in California, and maybe we depart, shall we say, from other jurisdictions in that approach. Next slide. So when it comes to policy, timing is everything, and unfortunately, there was a lesson learned, and that brought all the stakeholders to the table to put in place what we have here today with DFAL. So next slide. A little bit of timing. I mentioned the Grayson Bill 2269 that was ultimately vetoed by the governor. It was introduced, of course, at the beginning of the legislative session in January of 2022. That was a very difficult year across the board, particularly for consumers and the industry. Terra Luna, stablecoin, collapsed, lost its peg in May of 2022. So in fact, if you go back and see the redlining of the legislation, you can see where our lawmakers were very astute in making that observation that we should regulate stablecoin issuers and began to put some redlining in that text. Ultimately, when it got to the governor's desk, as I mentioned, it was vetoed. Unfortunately for the governor and all of us, we don't have the benefit of a crystal ball. And 2 months after that was vetoed, FTX collapsed. Next slide. So we knew at that point that it was pretty auspicious. We were going to have legislation in 2023 regulating digital financial assets. Very pointed hearing to begin that in February was Chair Grayson kicked that off. He of the Assembly, now of the Senate, discussing what this impact would be for consumers and really wanting to dive in and get a bill that ultimately would take these lessons and apply them to how we would protect Californians in the digital asset environment. Next slide. So fast forward to today, we have DFAL. And DFAL actually went into effect back in 2024. A lot of folks don't know that because we're focusing on the licensing piece, in which I'll focus my time on that as well. But there is another component. So DFAL actually consists of 2 bills, AB 39, which I've sort of truncated to call the crypto licensing or sort of the big tent crypto oversight legislating and supervisory bill. And then there's a lesser known component, SB 401, which is a bill that regulates specifically crypto kiosks and ATMs. Now, of course, the crypto kiosks and ATMs still have to go through the licensure process. It's not 2 separate doors, but rather an elevated expectation for the kiosk operators under 401. So you can see there some quoted language from the governor, as well as Senator Limon speaking specifically to her bill, SB 401. In the governor's language, you'll note in his response or his message to the legislature when signing AB 39, he recognized the importance of protecting consumers and investors from fraud and bad actors, but also remarked that there's some ambiguity of certain terms that maybe we need to come back to. And as I'll talk about that later, Chair Grayson took him up on that offer, and we have a cleanup bill right now actually pending in the legislature that would help redefine some of these more ambiguous terms. Next slide.
Were those signed? AB 39?
Yes, both have been signed
signed?
into law,
Okay.
correct. So SB 401, just real quickly, I want to focus more of our time on licensing. We go to the next slide. At a high level, the bigger components here, $1,000 per person per day daily limit for those transacting at a crypto kiosk. There's a transaction and fee cap, as well as a requirement of attribution of the exchange from which the price is quoted so that there's no unintended or intended process of baking in a premium to that rate. And then various different reporting requirements. There are a number of different enforcement actions that came out from the initial enforcement of that, which went live January 1st, 2024. It survived a unsuccessful court challenge, and certainly we can come back to this. I just wanted to highlight some of the bigger pieces of 401. Next slide. On to AB 39. Now we can talk about the legislative, the regulatory oversight and supervision of crypto digital asset businesses. Next slide. So what does AB 39 consist of? So legislation, and this was pointed out by the DFPI, a lot of the work on the regulatory requirements for the digital asset platforms were done by the legislature. In fact, it's very robust language within the bill, protecting consumers and other supervisory provisions. Cybersecurity features prominently, although it does not feature as prominently in other states, but very much so here in California in terms of requirements for these platforms. There's a financial stability component with audited financials. And broad authority is granted to the DFPI, as it ought to be, to implement and adopt rules, issue guidance, and otherwise enforce the compliance aspects of this licensing and oversight. There was limited substantive rulemaking, and that's not a critique, but rather a recognition, as was said before, that the legislature did a lot of the work. And so as the application came out, which was made available in March, with the deadline being of July 1st to apply, that gave a lot of the applicants and industry time to adapt and make observations, put together their analysis, their research, and ultimately prepare for and engage in that licensing process. As I mentioned before, there are still some pending concerns and some unresolved conflicts. A broad definition of digital financial assets, when you try to define something that is still ongoing and we don't quite know where the future is, we're going to try to use broader language like digital financial asset, but a lot of things are digitized and a lot of things could be considered a financial asset. So there's an opportunity now to work through the legislature or perhaps even later on through rulemaking to find out where that scope is and make sure we don't unnecessarily scope in non-financial activities. Go to the next slide. And by the way, I'm happy to come back to these. I know that there's a lot of nuance and a lot of specific pieces of information in each of these slides. So I mentioned the DFAL cleanup legislation, the efforts that are ongoing. The initial effort was AB 1934. That was signed into law in 2024. The original intent here was to address some of the items in the governor's signing letter with regard to ambiguity and other aspects of that initial bill. The bill quickly changed into an extension of 1 year for implementation of the licensing component. And so this was legislation in the opinion of the legislature in response to DFPI readiness, budget concerns, and other considerations. Fast forward to today, the pending legislation is SB 97, which is active right now, and very well may likely go to a floor vote either this week or next week. The author industry and DFPI are actively engaged in discussions. Largely, they're clouded by the uncertainty about what's going on in Washington, D.C. That may be a surprise to some in the room, surrounding market structure legislation. So again, trying to address some of the applicability concerns, control, best execution, and other facets of that initial bill. So this, of course, is time sensitive with the July 1st application date for DFAL fast approaching.
Who's the author of that one? AB 97?
Grayson.
Grayson again? Okay.
Yes. Next slide. So where can we go from here? I think the exciting part, at least to me, the exciting part is we have a regulatory framework for licensing and oversight of digital financial assets. That was most important so we can protect Californians and move forward with very strong innovation that recognizes the need to protect consumers. That allows us to go a little bit further downstream and engage in other pieces of either legislation, public policy, or engagement with government to do other things with blockchain and digital assets. So in that time, we've also passed some legislation across the way here in Sacramento, statements of financial interest. So for those of you filling out Form 700 that work for the state, now part of the Political Reform Act, or sorry, an enhancement to the Political Reform Act would now require disclosure of digital financial assets of $2,000 or more. As well, that we passed a SB 822, unclaimed property. So this modernizes the unclaimed property laws and now allows for the digital assets to be transferred from the platform to the controller's office and maintained in its native token form. This is very important because if it was a forced liquidation by the platforms, it would create a taxable event unbeknownst to the consumer. So when the consumer ultimately comes back, works through the controller's office, goes through the due diligence process, retrieves their assets that they lawfully owned, they might be in a position where they'd have to go back and amend their tax returns because there was a forced liquidation. That's not the case, I'm pleased to report, with SB 822. The controller actually made a wonderful presentation to the Banking and Finance Committee in the Assembly, provided an update. They're actively engaging with their counterparts in Oregon, who are going through a similar process relative to their legislation and their updating of their unclaimed property that, again, shares best interest in protecting consumers. So what do we have now before us in pending legislation? There's a lot of different topics we can cover here, and I'm happy to drill down into all of these, but recognizing that we are time limited. Legislation I talked about earlier, SB 97, that is the cleanup bill, AB 2335, another unclaimed property bill. This would allow for the controller's office to invest in digital assets, not with money that belongs potentially could be claimed by consumers, but rather principal that they could then reinvest into digital assets. 2409, this would prevent or prohibit rather elected officials from developing their own meme coins. So that's an interesting piece of legislation right there. And then SB 1208, very auspicious title, Money Laundering Digital Financial Assets. This particular bill would give tools for law enforcement to freeze digital assets for a period of 10 days after submitting a letter to a digital asset trading platform, with the idea that that then gives them 10 days to go seek a warrant to ultimately seize those assets if they are in connection to scams or fraud. And that was tied to the Little Hoover Commission hearing on fighting transnational financial services crime. And then there are opportunities aplenty to further modernize and leverage the blockchain technology that was spoken about by the professor. There have been ideas that have come through our membership and others in the industry about digital identity, state payments in stable coins. That would be a great way to move around money between different offices and different locations within the state and not have to pay those pesky wire fees. On-chain titles, I know there's a project going on with the DMV, putting automobile titles on chain, and now there are other opportunities perhaps with other licenses and filings. And of course, if we want to get super aggressive, perhaps we could create a rainy day fund with some digital assets and keep those in reserve. And with that, I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Well, I did learn that on Form 700, we must report if we own digital currencies for $2,000 or more. I was not aware of that. So Brenda, Rita, when you send around the notices for us all to file, but very, very informative. Thank you so much. It seems like there's two members of the legislature that is very active in this space. Obviously, Senator Grayson.
Yes.
But on the assembly side, it is
Valencia, yes. So Valencia is the author of the bill you spoke about, AB 1029, with the updating of the Form 700 and the ethics bill.
Okay.
So that was Valencia. So he's very much a champion of digital assets and is very, very interested in the space. And I think almost all of those pieces of legislation in the right-hand side under pending are either his or Mr. Grayson's.
Great. And you're actively advising them, I assume?
Yes, our organization is actively engaged and has an excellent dialogue with both
Great.
authors.
Okay, excellent.
Thank
All right. And the last presenter here, Mr. Sherman.
I promise I'll share the microphone.
Thank you. Thank you, Treasurer Ma. So as my panelists have gone over, we've done a great overview of what blockchain is and the current California regulation regime. We'll talk a little bit about how that fits into the rest of the states and the federal government, as well as some other use cases for what we're seeing today and where we think this industry is headed. We can go to the next slide, please. So if you are going to move money on the blockchain or through cryptocurrency, there is existing licensing and regulations that exist today. These are regulations that apply to fiat. So if you think about the Western Unions and MoneyGrams of the world, they're all regulated through what's called our money transmitter licensing. These are overseen by the state. So each state has its own requirements for what it takes in order to become registered and be able to move money. It's a patchwork of regulations, 49 different regimes that you have to go through, 49 different regulators, 49 different applications. Some take a few weeks, some take a few years. Each one has its own requirements and safeguards to make sure that the consumers and businesses that are trusting these providers to move money for them are properly protecting their deposits, protecting their customers, protecting their information. As time has gone on, we've seen states start to work together. There's multi-state exams. There's the NMLS system, which allows you to apply to multiple states at once, but still it is separate regulators with separate requirements. And crypto has traditionally fit into this, and the same regulations that apply to moving fiat have applied to stablecoin issuers, crypto on-ramp, off-ramp, and other transmission of these currencies. We can move to the next slide.
Hey, Max, who's the one state that doesn't have one?
That's Montana.
Thank you.
At the federal level, if you become a money transmitter, you often also register to be a money service business with FinCEN through the U.S. Department of Treasury. This allows these state registered companies to submit suspicious activity reports to the federal government. It's often used to capture illegal and illicit activity. Same thing that banks and other financial institutions use. It also allows the Treasury and the IRS to examine these companies on a regular basis. There's been a few proposed changes to the types of reporting that these companies are responsible for, but nothing has been enacted yet. But as it stands today, any money movement that these companies deem to be suspicious would require one of these reports over $5,000, or in some cases less. And sanction screening also applies. So if we think about the Office of Foreign Asset Control, making sure that these companies are not moving money for sanctioned individuals, sanctioned companies, terrorists, anyone else that we do not want to have access to our financial system. Same regulations apply, and these customers must be screened at onboarding and thereafter. We can move to the next slide, please. At the federal level, we have a new act, the Genius Act, which has several new ways that these companies will be regulated, as well as requirements for how they will be able to operate and what they must maintain in the way of deposits and insurance and oversight at the federal level. This is brand new. We're still seeing it being worked out at the federal level, and many companies, including the stablecoin and crypto companies in California, are extremely interested in moving to having a federal oversight. So moving away from that 49 state framework to having one regulator. So we're all on this panel and in this room closely watching to see how this will change the industry and how our regulators in DC will go about enacting this law. We can move to the next slide. So this landscape continues to evolve. One of the reasons we're here today is because everyone's interested in figuring out how we can use this new technology to replace existing slow money movement and systems that haven't been updated in many, many decades. Adoption has been growing year over year. We see businesses, consumers, states, everyone trying to get a piece of these new technologies and figure out how to implement them. At the same time, our regulations are creeping along and slowly moving towards being able to incorporate these new technologies and make sure that first and foremost our consumers and businesses are being protected and our financial system is not being exploited by bad actors. That all comes with risk. We've seen, as Joe mentioned, collapses of certain coins, of exchanges in the US. Importantly, we need to learn from what has gone wrong and make sure that we are incorporating that into the framework through which we'll regulate these types of technologies. We can move to the next slide. So where are we seeing this today? We've mentioned some social use cases and other new uses that have come out. What are the most common ones that we see, and where do we think this can fit into day-to-day banking and finance operations? Probably the biggest one that everyone's familiar with is Ciccolo, the stablecoin company, which is regulated at the state level and is moving towards being regulated at the federal level. They have the largest stablecoin here in the US. It's used for all different types of money movement. We've seen Ripple move into cross-border. So if we think about traditional remittances that take several days for families to move money back to their home countries, that can now be done in a matter of seconds or minutes at faster and cheaper than existing networks and rails that exist today. On the institutional side, we see money market funds and real estate being put on chain to be able to be better accounted for and ledgered, and continue to see new use cases come out every single day. We can move to the next slide. A few others that we've seen, institutional grade financial products. This is definitely applicable to what the state does with investments and other use cases for yield-bearing products and treasury management. PayPal, the San Jose-based company, has launched its own stablecoin, allowing customers to move money on chain with this coin. Importantly, near instant settlement, the time that it takes for an ACH to settle 2 to 3 days now has come down to minutes, allowing customers to have access to their funds in real time at a fraction of the cost that traditional rails provide. And then, as mentioned, we're starting to see real assets, real estate, cars, other types of assets be put on chain. We feel that this is probably one of the next areas of innovation. We'll continue to follow to see what happens there. With that, I will yield the mic and we can open it up for any questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I forgot to introduce my esteemed panelists here today. John Sheldon is my deputy overseeing all of our finance and really the person who put in the most work into this hearing. So thank you, John, and I'm going to have him manage the questions. However, we all, I'm sure, all have questions. Patrick Henning is my chief deputy. Stephanie Tom oversees, my deputy, overseeing all the savings programs. We have 4 or 5 savings programs here now. And then Kaim Morton oversees the green energy program, the schools, the hospitals, amongst others. So thank you all for being here today. And I'm going to let John, spearhead the questions, but we're all going to chime in because I have questions. I'm sure we all are taking notes. So, okay.
Yeah, no doubt. And thank you again for joining us today. I actually want to go back to the beginning and start over. There's a couple things that just basic blockchain knowledge that I would like to know a little bit more about. The consensus-based approach, Dr. Neitz, you mentioned on the blockchain itself. I guess what I think about when I hear consensus-based approach is like a Wikipedia. But how do you do that in general if somebody disagrees with what happened on the chain? How do you fix the chain if there is an error?
So so the short answer is if the transaction that's being entered onto the chain has been confirmed under proof of work consensus or validated under proof of stake, there is no way to go back and fix it because it's already been approved through consensus. So the more technical answer to the question depends on the type of consensus mechanism that you're talking about. So for example, I'm going to debate how far in the weeds to go, but I'm going to do a short answer here. So Bitcoin uses a consensus mechanism called proof of work, which is very environmentally intensive and requires folks who are running the nodes to continually try to solve an algorithmic puzzle. And the node that solves the puzzle is deemed to have confirmed the transaction. And in exchange for confirming the transaction, that node would receive a block reward in the form of Bitcoin. It used to be 24 Bitcoin, which would be an enormous amount of money. It has been halving, going down by halves over the course of as time has gone on with Bitcoin. And eventually Bitcoin will hit its cap of 21 million Bitcoin. So the incentive there to run these very high electricity demand algorithmic puzzles is that you would receive Bitcoin as a reward. It used to be that you could do this from your garage. I have a student years ago who stayed behind in his college dorm to run a Bitcoin mining operation, managed to mine 1 Bitcoin through this consensus mechanism, and then had to sell it when the university came back, the leadership came back in January, looked at their electricity bill and said, oh my God, threw them out of the dorms, and then they had to sell the Bitcoin in order to repay the electricity bill. So those days are pretty much over when it comes to proof of work. You really need to have more centralized servers. What's happened. You don't need them, but what's happened is that people have seen a market opportunity here. And so that's where you have these server farms kind of running this algorithmic hash over and over. On the other hand, we have proof of stake. There are actually so many different types of consensus mechanisms, but I'm just going to do those 2 for today's purposes. Proof of stake is the one that Ethereum actually moved to after starting as proof of work and moving to proof of stake. Proof of stake consensus mechanisms require you to literally stake collateral into the protocol. So, for example, if I wanted to stake ETH, the currency that Ethereum, the Ethereum currency, I could stake ETH into the consensus protocol, meaning I'm putting a certain amount of ETH as collateral into this protocol. And then there will be an operation run that would determine whether or who out of everybody that puts stake in is the one who would actually validate the transaction. The more stake you put in, the more likelihood that you're the one to validate the transaction, and you would receive the block reward. So again, these are just different ways to try to reach consensus. You can imagine it in these protocols where they're all over the world and you have to reach consensus. There has to be some way to be able to confirm those transactions, and those, what we would call proof of work or proof of stake mining, is the way in which you would validate or confirm transactions. If you don't like what happened, it's immutable. So now there are exceptions that we've seen, like you folks will know, like the hard fork that happened with Ethereum, where there was Ethereum's currency was stolen, and some of the folks behind Ethereum decided that they would fork the chain and start a new one. I mean, there's various exceptions to this rule, but generally speaking, it's an immutable chain. If you don't like it, you can always move to another chain.
I do have a question, as quantum, we're talking about quantum and the power of quantum.
Good. We need to talk about quantum. Yeah.
Yes. Are they going to be able to break into all of these, private blockchain, decentralized ones very quickly?
This is a great question. Okay, so there's a theoretical answer and a practical answer. So the theoretical answer is, yes, quantum will blow up everything, right? It's going to ruin encryption. I mean, I sit on the New York State Virtual Currency Advisory Board. A year and a half ago, they did a presentation for us on quantum computing because Wall Street's really nervous, as they should be, because quantum computers will have the potential to be able to break encryption. When it comes to blockchains, so there are the folks that sort of underlie the foundations on the main chains are already looking into this. The Stellar Development Foundation, for example, released their quantum plan for post-quantum cryptography last week. So you could read that plan and kind of see how blockchains are getting ready for quantum. I think that, so that's the theoretical answer is yes. Practically speaking, we have some time. As to how much time we have, that's up for debate, right? Google is now saying 2027, 2028, 2029. I am starting to be, I'm not an alarmist by any stretch, but I do, and we have the NIST post-quantum cryptography algorithms that folks can adopt. And so, there are mechanisms in place to protect when it comes to quantum computing. But the reason the center is going to start doing these trainings on quantum computing is because I think it's important. I am not a physicist. I have managed to collaborate with a physics professor at USF to do these. And so I'm happy to chat more about quantum computing if folks are interested.
And, California, we're all obviously very concerned about energy. If we do not develop the necessary energy, these folks are going to go to either other states or other countries. And are they going to be able to hack in or, from any country?
Do you mean for blockchains or for quantum?
For quantum.
Oh, for quantum. So quantum computing is a little different because it's not as accessible as blockchain. So in order to run a quantum computer, you have to have the hardware, which is extraordinarily expensive. Like right now, IBM has the hardware, Google has the hardware, research universities have the hardware, but it's not like big, like you can't, my student, for example, can't start quantum computing in his dorm. So, right now, the expense of the hardware to actually build the quantum computer is really cost prohibitive for folks to just kind of randomly start it. The fear, of course, with quantum computing is that it's not impossible. And if an adversarial nation, for example, were to reach Q-Day, as they call it, the day that quantum computing is able to break things before we're able to set up things in effect to prevent it, then that's problematic.
Let me see first before I keep going if any of my fellow deputies want to get in on this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Warden. Patrick, did you have? Professor, wanted to go back to what you initially started talking about in terms of social good and impact, and some of the examples that are, there, particularly in terms of blockchain. Could this make financing for local projects and things a little easier to, to manage or to get to for local government?
So I'm so glad you asked this question, because at the center, we actually have worked on a microbond project. So I'll point you to Berkeley, where the city of Berkeley is actually working on, and they've been working on this, by the way, for 6 or 7 years, a microbond built on blockchain that would enable municipalities to allow their residents to purchase on-chain. It's basically on-chain tokenization of bonds. But it enables retail investors to be able to access municipal bonds in a way that's sort of impossible, given the $500,000 that it takes in order to access municipal bond purchasing. We were too early in our project. Actually, we've decided we've wrapped up the project because, for obvious reasons, municipalities are really nervous. We started this fairly soon after the FTX collapse. The timing was just not correct, obviously, for that. But Berkeley is moving forward, working to try to tokenize the funds needed to purchase a fire engine. And so City Council member Ben Bartlett is the one who's been spearheading that microbond project. And so the short answer is yes, and I can give you that example. And there are lots of other examples of ways that state and local governments really could benefit from blockchain. Our blockchain, it's a good time for me to give a shout out to our blockchain working group report that actually spelled out a bunch, archives. Like there's a bunch, and I know Ajay is here to talk about the DMV. Like there are lots of different ways blockchain can be used to make these services more accessible and streamlined.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had a quick question. Maybe it's for a later panel, but in dealing with blockchain, it seems like it's pretty immutable. Like there's not a lot of room in there if errors are made, but we're still dealing with a lot of people who inherently make errors. And that wasn't a slam at DMV, but just to say that there's a lot of people at DMV, and sometimes inputting can be challenging and otherwise. And so I'm concerned a little bit about, has anybody sort of figured out the oops factor that happens with just having people involved in the process?
I like your question, because what you're showing is that immutability is both a blessing and a curse, right? So, I mean, for example, if someone writes child porn onto the Ethereum blockchain, that's a real problem, right? But it's immutable. The short answer to your question is that you could not use a permissionless blockchain like Bitcoin, Ethereum, these I was basically talking about public blockchains. You could use a private blockchain. And that way you're able to control who writes on. Even if everybody in California could access to view the blockchain, you could control who writes on to the blockchain. And so that gives you more control. Things can be reviewed, for example, for errors before they would be uploaded onto the chain.
Treasurer Khan.
Thank you. I have a question, really probably maybe a little bit building on Chief Deputy Henning's question, bringing it down more to the user around financial education, naturally because I oversee savings programs. What are the thoughts of the panel around financial education standards, how the state of California could really help make sure that Californians are ready and really educated around blockchain, around how this can really help them in their day-to-day? I mean, right now the curriculum is being built to, of course, require financial educations in high school, but they're still looking at what is a savings account and what is compound interest, and just what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I'll share from CBAC's perspective. I think it was 2 years ago, we had a bill, worked with Senator Caballero to introduce a bill that would put blockchain education into our community college system. Unfortunately, the bill did not go through, did not ultimately get a floor vote and get passed, obviously, but it started a conversation. And I think that there's a real appetite for that, particularly in industry. In fact, a lot of our members and the industry at large spend a lot of time educating consumers through their website, not just the disclosures and warnings, which of course are important and in many cases required, but also rewarding, in the case of some platforms I can think of, their users for learning more about cryptocurrency and more about blockchain, because the thought is an educated consumer is a wise consumer and that it's beneficial to all parties concerned. So we would very much support that as an industry. And I often say in the crypto space, education is our biggest strength, and in some cases our biggest weakness. And by weakness, I mean there's never enough time. There's never enough opportunity. We're always trying to get out there and educate. So if there's an opportunity to work with your office or any folks in California or the community college system or any agency of state government, I think it's a tremendous opportunity and educated consumers. And that's going to help us keep the marketplace safe for Californians, which is the goal of everyone in this room, but also allow us to accelerate forward with innovation.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, what was that bill number? By chance?
I don't
Or we
recall it
can
off
get
the top of my head.
No
I
worries.
could research that and get back to you.
Thank you.
Can I add something?
Sure.
Sorry, I'm an educator. You're going to need to red card me on the education front. But one thing I just want to point out, I do a lot of community outreach, and so beyond the law school and colleges. I think that education is not just about educating young people around crypto. I do some pro bono work for a group that works with seniors who are interested in learning more. Seniors are being scammed at an unbelievable level, and they're not the folks that people naturally turn to when they're talking about cryptocurrency education. So I just want to say that vulnerable populations, especially the unbanked, for example, elderly folks, in addition to I'm so pleased about the high schools, but there are lots of vulnerable communities in California that are not going to go on to the Treasurer's website, unfortunately, and learn about the scams. And so multimodal education, sending people out there is probably a really good way to think about that. And I have resources I can share.
Great.
Which reminds me, I think we should do a scam workshop next, okay?
Do a scam or a scam workshop?
Scam. The scams that are out there, because we're all getting
I
them,
understand.
whether email, phone call, text messages, and they are more sophisticated these days. So I think that'll be our next convening. But John.
So 30 seconds, and Joe, you can have a minute.
Oh, sorry, I just want to follow up real quick. Thank you. On the education piece. So I mentioned it in my presentation. So the Little Hoover Commission put together a comprehensive 40+ page report with 13 recommendations. And a lot of that included elements of education, and whether that's for our partners in law enforcement or industry or opportunities for state government to educate consumers, that featured prominently in that report. So I think that may be a good opportunity to cross-reference for purposes of your research and analysis.
How long ago was that?
May, I believe. So this year.
Oh, great.
Yes.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Fantastic. And I know we started just a minute late or a few minutes late. So just in 30 seconds each, I just wanted to kind of wrap this on the questions anyway. From each of you, give us 30 seconds on if you were a state policymaker, recognizing there is a lot of legislation that tries to make its way through our legislature and to the governor's desk. If you're a state policy maker to try to encourage innovation, but also protect consumers and investors in this space, what would you focus on? Maybe start with Max and
Sure,
move down the
go
line.
first. I would focus on the benefits that citizens of California provide. So SNAP, EBT, other benefits that are today dispersed through large banks, prepaid cards, other legacy rails that have not been innovated on in many years. I think that's one of the best places that we can help people to access money faster, give them the resources that they need to be able to provide for themselves and their families. That's where I would focus my time.
I guess with a compliance background, I'm a little biased, but I would focus our time on fighting fraud. It was sort of mentioned in some of the previous questions. I did mention the Little Hoover Commission's report, and that was at the behest of Chair Grayson and I think 20+ legislators asking for that report. There's a real scamdemic going on right now in our country. It's affecting Californians, it's affecting people all over the United States, particularly vulnerable populations that are unfortunately, even very educated people, frankly, are falling for these scams and sending cryptocurrency or other assets, digital or TradFi, to various bad actors. And I think education is a strong component of that, and it's great to have different offices from the state. It may not be that first message that gets through to the victim, it may be the second or third agency of government or touch point. And so I think education is key around that, and giving the tools to law enforcement to help follow up on conduct these investigations, use blockchain analytics, which was discussed earlier, where we can see all these blockchain transactions going back to the Genesis block in the case of Bitcoin. That transparency is great for consumers, it's great for industry, but law enforcement says it's really great because it allows them to build a case, trace those funds, and hopefully in the case of scams, reunite the victim with their lost assets?
Well, I've done a lot of thinking around this, so I have lots of answers. But for my one answer, I think the most important thing is outreach. I think that folks don't understand what crypto is, which makes some people naturally rush in and other people naturally stay back. And so to avoid not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, I think it's important to really to approach outreach from both of those things, right? Blockchain can provide a lot of jobs and opportunities for people who may or may not be able to work in traditional financial services, but also we need to be concerned about the people who are just going to rush in with no knowledge or education around what the risks could be. So in my mind, I think outreach is the most important thing that the government could do, is to alert citizens through various mechanisms as to what those risks might be.
Thank you. Hence why I don't have any cryptocurrency, because it was too confusing to begin with 10 years ago, having to open up an account and put, I'm like, where's the money going? Where's the coins? I don't understand. Like, I'm an accountant. I like to see, touch, access quickly. So anyway, thank you all very much for this panel. We're going to introduce our next panel. Maybe John, you can.
Let's do a changeover, please.
And this is going to be recorded, right? So it'll be accessible online. We will send out the links to everyone. So thank you. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you to the first panel, and we're going to move right into our second panel. This one being focused on California public sector participation in blockchain and digital financial assets. So we're going to discuss on this panel a number of things. It'll talk a little bit about consumer protection, digital identity, public service delivery, unclaimed property, and the evolving relationship between state and federal regulation, as well as anything else our panelists want to dive into. So today, please welcome Brynly Llyr. She is the Deputy Commissioner for Digital Assets at the California Department of Financial Protection and Innovation. That's a mouthful. I think we call it DFPI. I've learned all these acronyms now that I've been in Sacramento for a bit. Maybe not all of them, some of them. Ajay Gupta, who's our Chief Digital Transformation Officer for the California Department of Motor Vehicles. Thank you, Ajay. And then Ted Lambert, who is our Acting Director of Unclaimed Property at the California State Controller's Office. You've heard a little bit about that issue already on panel one, so we're going to dive into that a little bit more. I'm going to pause and see if you all just want to make a 5 or 10 minute statement first, or if you want us to dive right into questions. I think we kind of set up to make some comments. So maybe we'd start with Brynly.
Sure. Thank you. Brynly Llyr, Deputy Commissioner, Department of Financial Protection and Innovation. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
There we are. Thanks. It's great to be here. Thank you, Treasurer Ma and deputies, for holding this hearing. I have been with the department, the DFPI, for about 3 years, and just a little bit about my background, because I think it's relevant to what we're doing at the DFPI. I joined 3 years ago. Before that, I was a lawyer in the Bay Area for about 20 years. My focus was on technology, payments, platforms, and crypto. I was general counsel at Ripple, a company that you heard about a little bit earlier. I was part of a founding team on a mobile-first blockchain, and I was head of digital assets and blockchain at the World Economic Forum. So I come to this position having a bit of background, and I feel really privileged to be in a position where we are rolling out this framework in California. So a bit more about the digital financial asset law. Mr. Ciccolo told you a bit about 401 and 39. Let me talk about it a little bit differently to put a little more context around why it is so important that we're doing this. It was signed into law October 2023. And it is really the second comprehensive state licensing program for crypto businesses. It's only the second. The first was New York. 10 years ago, they came out with their BitLicense. It is and this is something that Mr. Sherman spoke about in the last panel, we have seen over the last 10 years that many states have taken an approach to regulate crypto through their money transmitter licensing programs. California has not done that. In 2021, it made the determination that crypto businesses would not fall under money transmission. And so really this is the first time that we're coming in to regulate these types of crypto businesses. It is very important. And it is very important because as the fourth largest economy, you can imagine that the scams and frauds that we feel in this state is very, very high. And we don't need to speculate about that. Coming from the FBI report for 2025, California has over $2 billion in losses just in 2025 alone. So this law, this digital financial assets law that requires crypto businesses to apply for a license, and in implying they need to show that they meet certain standards. This is very important because oftentimes, whether or not a scam is successful or not, comes down to the intermediary that makes that scam possible. Right now, we cannot just turn fiat magically into crypto assets. Oftentimes, Californians will need to rely on these intermediaries. Those intermediaries are who we will be licensing and who we are going to be supervising. A bit about the department. We regulate banks, credit unions, money transmitters, debt collectors. And we typically regulate through licensing. If you're one of these businesses and you want to operate in California, you need to demonstrate a number of things that you have. You've met certain standards required for financial solvency, that you are adhering to adequate anti-money laundering practices, that you are doing, you have the character and fitness to operate these businesses. Our department not only issues licenses, but we have examination authority as well, which is also really important. So that is the framework. We are going to be having that same work apply to digital financial asset companies. Now, a bit about the DFAL. I have it with me. I carry it with me everywhere. That's why I don't get invited to parties, but that's another. So our digital financial assets law, it takes a very pragmatic approach. It doesn't try to regulate all instances of crypto in all circumstances. Instead, it looks at really 4 business types. Those 4 business types that will need a license and will need to apply: exchanges. This is where Californians will go and buy crypto assets. It also covers stablecoin issuers. We had some of our panelists talk about Genius. There's now a federal framework, but for now, our law will regulate stablecoin issuers. The third type is custody providers. These are institutions that are safekeeping crypto for Californians. And the fourth are crypto kiosks. So Mr. Ciccolo talked about that a little bit. This came from 401. And those crypto kiosks, you can typically see them in grocery stores and gas stations. These have been regulated in our state since January 1, 2024.
Okay.
So
I'm just asking, have you guys seen crypto kiosks?
you absolutely have. You absolutely have. The green machine in front of the Safeway, the Coinstar machine, that is also a crypto ATM.
Okay, I'll take a look.
Take a look. Yeah, we regulate those. So that is an overview. This is a licensing program that goes into effect July 1, 2026. That is next week. That means that if you are one of these types of businesses and you want to continue to do business in California, you must have submitted an application to us by July 1. The doors are open. We are actively looking through those applications, but that deadline is fast approaching.
How many applications have we received?
We are expecting many right at the deadline, but it has been over 30 so far.
Before we move on, Brynly, could you just comment on where DFAL lies in relation to what's going on at the federal level? We might get into this a bit later, but just to complete that before we turn to your other two panelists.
Sure. So the digital financial assets law, it goes live. It is live law in California and has been since it was signed into law and went into effect January 1, 2024. We have a number of bills and laws on the federal level. One, Genius, this will cover stablecoin issuers. That will go into effect January 2027. At that point, it seems unlikely that that area of DeFi will continue. We won't be overseeing stablecoin issuers in the same way. The other federal bill that we are seeing right now is something called the Market Structure Act, and it has not moved significantly in the last short while, but that has the potential to preempt what states can do in terms of regulating digital financial asset companies.
Thank you. Okay, so next, turning to Ajay, we know the DMV has been exploring utilizing blockchain technology for some time now, including through various digital credentials programs and modernization initiatives. So I know you're going to provide us a bit of an overview of what's going on at DMV and practical benefits that'll provide provided to everyday Californians, as well as how the DMV evaluates using these programs. And I believe you have some slides that you wanted to hit.
I do. Good morning. So a little bit about what the motivation is. So my role at the DMV is to transform our business processes, our customer interactions, our back office processes to have more digital presence for efficiency reasons and to provide better customer service. So with that goal in mind, we have looked at quite a few things: identity as a digital credential, and then other what we call as indicia or products, like the vehicle title as a digital credential or a digital asset. The problem statement that we started to look at around 2020 was to, first of all, from customer vantage point, to reduce the friction associated with transferring the vehicles, and also reduce the fraud associated with transferring the vehicles. There is quite a bit of complexity with the vehicle transfer. For those of you who have bought and sold the cars, there is a lot goes on when you buy it from a dealer or if you buy it from another individual, quite a few steps in the process. And it may be also happening from an out-of-state source as well. And that's where some of the fraud starts too. So once again, looking at the complexity of our title transfer process for new or used vehicles, in fact, some of the other things like dismantlers and impounded vehicles, et cetera, they all go through this process of transferring the title, which essentially is the paperwork to change the owner from one person to another person on another business entity. Quite a few steps in it. And so there's the complexity and very distasteful process sometimes, a lot of paperwork for good reasons. But in general, beyond the complexity of it, there is also quite a bit of fraud, especially when you're bringing in vehicles from out of state. There have been instances where people have changed the branding, meaning whether it was a salvage vehicle and changing it to a pristine title, etc. So there have been some work done in the industry to create some centralized verification across the states. But in general, it still remains a field that's open to quite a bit of fraud. There is also a need, and has always been a need, which DMV is one of the providers for information for law enforcement, for dealerships, for online providers, to provide information about the vehicle. So it's a very centralized hub and spoke mechanism. So those are sort of like the challenge statements that we were looking at. So the friction, the fraud, and just the access to information. If we go to the next slide. So what we looked at, and this was in 2020, was, and NFTs were very popular, and that still is a very good tool to use when you're trying to create what we call as a digital twin of a paper vehicle title. So if you look at your title, it has some basic information. It's got your vehicle identification number and the ownership information and certain pieces of information that makes that piece of paper very unique. If you lose that paper, the next paper that you get, the information may be the same, but it has a very unique identifier on it. So that created a very easy way for us to dabble with the notion of generating a non-fungible token, which represents that unique piece of paper as a digital twin. So we know and we have acknowledged that paper is not going away for a while, but we can live in this world where we are able to create a digital version of something and still have physical version as well, enable online and even in-person digital transactions, but still allow for people who prefer paper-based transaction as well, till the world is fully digital at some point in time. So there is an NFT becomes a record of ownership. Once it's created, it cannot be amended. Professor Neitz was talking about how its blockchain is immutable, and that's extremely important to us to reduce fraud, and I'll get to that in a second. And the record remains permanently on the chain. What we don't do is put in a bunch of personally identifiable information on the chain. It's a bunch of cryptography, and hopefully I'll get to touch on how we are looking at the way we do use NIST compliant curves for cryptography and looking at post-quantum cryptography safety as well. And then the change history is readily tracked. And the way we avoid, one of the questions that was asked previously by the panel was that the way we avoid sort of like errors or issues, right? People could make mistake, and DMV came up in that example, that this actually is a shadow ledger. The core system still remains the DMV systems at this point in time, and it creates a replica of an immutable asset once the transaction has been finalized. So it always keeps track of final set of transactions that's then accessible for further processing and in the future peer-to-peer transactions as well. But DMV always remains in the middle of it, given our nature as a regulator. Next slide. So the one important thing that actually was touched as well, the notion of putting in the important, let's call it the terms of use on blockchain, which is in form of smart contracts. The rules that are required to issue a title, the rules that are required to put a title in the escrow, and the rules that are required to transfer the title over, they're all represented as a smart contract. Think of it as a piece of code that's running on smart contract. Next slide. So in general, I had a lot of pictures, but John figured this will be probably the simplest representation. So here it is. We have a buyer, seller, and a DMV technician. The buyer has an intent to buy. A seller has, first of all, a buyer also wants to verify whether it's a legit title. The second is then intent to buy, and then seller has the intent to sell. And then DMV has the requirement to verify the process, but also collect the transfer fees in the process. So essentially, there is this notion of an escrow that happens. So it's not taking an NFT, burning the token, and creating a new or baking a new token. It's actually about putting that vehicle into an escrow for a period of time, which unclaimed property can actually take advantage of as well, and then eventually finish the transaction. So those are the three players. Now, if you have an out-of-state vehicle, and this is what we are working on with AMVA, American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, on how we're going to enable interstate transfer with or without them participating in the blockchain as well. So as the titles come in, the buyer can do, whether it's an online entity or a dealer or an individual, can do verification through the central system called National Motor Vehicle Information System, NMVIDIS, and they can verify the branding, but they cannot verify the ownership. This blockchain-based system also lets you verify the ownership. One final thoughts. I know Professor Neitz already talked about some of the concepts. Us as public sector entity, we were very aware of what was happening in 2020 with blockchain. So what we made sure of, if you can go to the next slide, was number one, we are using, and at that point in time, Ethereum was not a proof of stake blockchain. We looked at a blockchain that was actually proof of stake. We knew that energy consumption and sustainability is going to be important. So we went for something that was using proof of stake for an asset tracking system that was sufficient for us to be able to start with that process. We also started with a nationally available standard provided by a National Institution of Standards and Technology to use the elliptical curves for cryptography that are compliant. And the same we are going to continue to follow. We're going to, when NIST is coming up with post-quantum cryptography standards, we're going to follow those standards as well. And we have a promise
Hi,
from...
this is Frida Pepper, Janet Radofker's daughter. I was told last week to send a picture over to someone, and I thought maybe I'd be called about it, making an appointment for her.
Thank you. Sorry, that seems like a misfire. That was not me. And then there is support for technology, so multiple blockchain technologies can work with each other. And also, this is really interesting, the formal verification of smart contracts. For those of you who are sort of dabbling with software development projects, there is this whole notion of inputs and outputs and testing the outputs to make sure that works. The blockchain that we're using also has this notion of mathematical validation of this code. So it sort of runs through millions of transaction, make sure the expected outcome is the same and it avoids, because our goal is to go from, right now we are on private blockchain. Goal is to go into public blockchain. And when we do, we would have that safeguard in place. Thanks.
I just have a question. In the vehicle title slide, you said the owner is not part of the record. And then you just said that we can verify the owner.
Yeah.
So how's the owner not in the record, but then you can verify the owner?
Yeah, so the owner information is not on the blockchain, but the pointer to the owner record is on the blockchain cryptographically, so essentially encrypted, if that makes sense. And that requires via smart contracts. So if you were to imagine some information is sitting there, your device which has a blockchain identifier is bound to that particular record. When you do need that particular information, you can call that info and then via smart contract, grab the rest of the information from the DMV systems.
And like smog checks, out-of-state
Yes.
vehicles don't necessarily require smog, but some people want to bring their fancy cars here. Like, are you going to be able to identify whether the car was bought from out-of-state and whether they pass smog? Because we have different laws, right?
Yeah. So, well, if it comes to California, you do have to pass. You do have certain inspection and smog requirements, but it would depend on whether a neighboring state like Nevada and Arizona, and actually, interestingly enough, one of the Midwest states have more cars sold brought in from California than actually some of these neighboring states. So it depends on their ability to participate or interest in participating in blockchain. Outside that, some of this information they're still required to provide to us as part of the California ecosystem, and then that gets recorded as part of the record, and a cryptographic image of that is available on blockchain as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Ajay. And we'll come back to additional questions in a few minutes. I wanted to turn to Ted from the State Controller's Office and hear more about digital assets. Obviously, this creates some unique challenges for the Controller's Office, who handles all unclaimed property for the state. So if you could just give us an overview of how you're preparing to address these big issues, and among other things, obviously custody, valuation, timing, consumer claims, et cetera, all a big part of the issues. And I believe you have some slides as well, Ted. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, we do have some slides. I think we're pulling them up right now. But first off, I just want to thank the panel for having me today. I oversee unclaimed property, and then I also oversee state accounting and reporting for the Controller's Office. So I'm going to talk about SB 822, which pretty much is guiding where we're going. This was something that the Controller supported. It is innovative, with the focus on transparency and accountability and consumer protection. This, like I said, something that the Controller supported. So the SB 822, one, it gives guidance to unclaimed property. It defines digital financial assets and how they will escheat to the state of California. And then, like you mentioned, or we've talked about, there are challenges that are just natural because there's really no, this really hasn't been done before at a state level. So we're trying to do everything right. We're trying to put everything in place. But yes, there are things that we're working through. So a couple definitions up there just to help guide it. Next slide. So SB 822, it is identifying virtual currency as an intangible asset that will be escheated to the state of California after 3 years of dormancy. Right now, kind of our understanding of what's out there of digital assets that might come to the state are from a number of audits that are currently open. And I'll get to kind of what those numbers are as far as volume. The other thing that we're working through is kind of the period of when it's identified and when it comes in. Next slide, please. So the first remittance to the state of California will be June 2027. SB 822 went into law on January 1st, 2026. So what we're looking for as far as timeline is this November, the expectation is that holders of digital assets will report what they think are dormant. And so that means there hasn't been any contact, whether it be going onto the account, whether it be responding to an email, whatever it is that kind of the holder or the owner of those assets kind of identifies that, hey, I am acknowledging that I have them, and that every 3 years they just have to have some form of acknowledgement. So the assets that we think that are out there, based on current estimates, we believe there's about 1 million-ish unique assets that could potentially be sent to the state. The value of those currently about 600 million. If you would have asked us that back in October when we did our original estimates, the value of that would have been well over $1 billion. So, when we think about this, we're thinking about, okay, what could potentially come into the state, what could then potentially be converted to US dollars and held, eventually it would go to the general fund. So what California does is holds assets, digital assets similar to securities. That's one of the things that we did in 822 is, decided to treat digital assets like securities. And so what California does is holds that for 18 to 20 months before we convert them to US dollars. Next slide, please. So one of the things that other states are thinking about, and it is the idea of liquidation versus custody. So California has taken the approach of, we want to bring on a custodian to hold the digital assets for us. Tax implications, as mentioned before. And also we want to do that with a private firm. So it's not something that the state is trying to do ourselves. That would be an extreme undertaking with, security issues and everything along those lines. And then, internally, so, okay, we have the custodian. Since this is a new program, we have to set up policies and procedures. how it goes from end to end from the time it comes into, gets sent to the state, gets reported to the state, goes to the custodian, is either transferred back to the individual or is sold and held as cash. So we're working on business process workflows. We know that there's going to be increased volume of claims that are coming in. We know that there's going to be a lot of questions coming in. So we're trying to build our group to support the increase of volume. One of the things that we have learned from the audit is the ability to identify the person to the asset. So from what I understand is that, over 80–85% of kind of the high value assets we can identify to the person. And so in SB 822, we can decline accepting digital financial assets. And really the purpose of that is, one is if we can't get them back to the person, the true owner, then that's not something that we would want to hold. Just because of, really the purpose of the program is returning it back. And so within all that, we're just looking at what the operational impact is to the program, and then kind of setting up for that as we go into our holder notice period in November, and then remittance of the digital financial assets in June of 2027. Next slide. So just the key takeaways, the definition of digital assets and unclaimed property law. SB 822 did that and gives us guidance. Like I said, they're treated like securities. Our plan is to bring on a custodian, and I think there are, it's going to be a small group, and it's going to be important that that they take responsibility for the assets that they're holding, similar like Wells Fargo does for securities now. And then just the realization in this program, there is extreme volatility, and like I mentioned, what it was back in October is not what it's worth now. Now it could go the other direction. There's no, I don't know that there's a clear path towards anything, but just understanding that is important when we're talking about this program. So that was all I had for today.
All right. Well, thank you all for your comments. I think we'll jump into Q&A. I think we have about 20 minutes or so. So maybe let me look down the days and see if Deputy Treasurer Morton, Deputy Treasurer Tom have some questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you guys very much. From the DFPI perspective, I'm wondering, as you guys are looking at the things that came out of the blockchain working group report and actually kind of like experiences in real time, the two things I was wondering is, like, one, have you established your role in kind of like encouraging pilots with as you see people looking to use cryptocurrency and blockchain, and then, or from that, have you just seen some of your regulated entities really start to move into that space, and where are they trying to use it?
Thank you for the question. In terms of encouraging pilots, our law is live. So if you are engaged in digital financial asset activity that is covered, you will need a license. That said, there are a number of exemptions in the law. So if you are a new business and your revenues are very low, you can be exempt from the law. So in effect, it can be a way to pilot out some products. That said, we have to be careful, because when Californians are relying on these businesses to either engage in digital asset activity or safeguard digital assets, the losses are real. So if you are engaged in this activity, you do need to be meeting standards. And those standards, they're particularly important when it comes to cyber and operational security and fraud and other things. So the short answer is, there are ways that you, as a company in California, can try out different technologies. There are some exemptions in the law as it stands now, but let's also be really clear that there can be real effects to Californians. In terms of being open to innovation at the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation, innovation is in our title, and we have an Office of Financial Technology and Innovation. So actually we're open all the time for entrepreneurs to set up office hours with us to talk about their ideas and to help entrepreneurs and builders really understand how regulation might apply to what they're building. Hope that answers your question.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. So many questions, given what you shared this morning, but I'll narrow it down to a couple. My first question is, if you can talk a little bit more, I guess this is for the broader panel, around public-private partnerships. And I think that we just talked about it, of course, from Brynly, about the innovation that's in your name. I like that. But how else can the state really foster stronger public-private partnerships to make sure that, frankly, there are more use cases, right? More pilot projects, if we want to say, but more leveraging blockchain, cryptocurrency. We talked about financial education, but we want to make sure that we are, I dare to say, cutting edge, but leveraging technology at the right time for Californians.
Great question, by the way. That's sort of core of how we've been doing a whole lot of innovation work at the DMV. In fact, 2 days from now, I'm doing another public-private partnership event just focused on digital identity here in Sacramento, with federal, state, and international entities coming in. And that's where lies the answer. It's public-private, academy, and international partnerships. Those all have to come together for this to really work, for us to do it right and learn from it and then do better. In terms of, in fact, the one thing that I forgot to mention is DMV is one of the providers of this blockchain technology, right? The focus is not on blockchain, it's on the business problem that we're trying to solve. But we are also a consumer, or gonna be a consumer of blockchain. There is at least 3 counties in California who are migrating, or at least starting to put in their vital records on blockchain as well. Riverside, Surrey, and one more, I can't remember. But essentially the idea is that it's here, whether it's in crypto form with financial transactions or non-financial transaction for asset tracking. The technology is amazing in terms of being able to accomplish that. And there is a lot of international work that has been done, including at country level, at jurisdiction level, for us to really draw from. And we've been doing that in the digital identity space at the DMV, and also have had interactions with multiple international entities, both us as the receiver of information and also provider of information, sort of providing the lessons learned on what we have put together with our 44 million vehicles on blockchain. The goal is, and the hope is, that if, the blockchain work group was a wonderful sort of initiative that started. It was good while blockchain was hot, but it has not sustained itself. So this hearing was a pleasant surprise to sort of be able to continue the journey, be able to do some storytelling around it. So being able to provide, whether it's through DFPI or other resources, a forum or funded activities which will allow for public-private partnership to cherish. In fact, there's a lot of private entities, which I'm sure the foundations, et cetera, who are just plain simple trying to create awareness. We as public sector entities should be able to tap into those resources to create awareness, whether it's, we're talking about creating awareness in the educational institutions, or through the state sector, to be able to take advantage of the tools and the features that are available, that are out there. So some of it is sort of happening very informally, but it's a great question on how can we make it better? Yes. How can we make it different? How can we maybe even revive it? Because the hype cycle is over for blockchain. Okay. Now it is the sustenance and taking advantage of all the good things that it can do.
Okay, Thank you. I have a quick follow-up question too, and I agree with everything that you said about the hype. And I was like, we've been talking about this for a while, but that is exactly why, we wanted to make sure that we had this hearing, because there's still many, many benefits. The follow-up to that is really, given your experience, first of all, kudos to you on the digital ID and the driver's license, by the way. I did, download that. I think I shared that. It took really 5 minutes, which is amazing. What do you feel, and this could be for the panel as well, what has been the true key success factor in mitigating the risk, kind of overcoming the fear around whether it be state or local government to really embark on these, I'll say, pilot projects or these initiatives, right? Because I don't feel it's true adoption, but what is the key success factor that you all have experienced so that this can become, I dare say, more mainstream or just greater use of blockchain?
I don't deal in the use cases as much, but I will say that part of why we have regulation now and we are holding crypto businesses accountable to meet certain standards, I think part of that is because we have hit fraud and scam numbers that are so high that we really do need to take action. And so that is partly why we're here. If I could respond to your earlier question too about how we do and nurture public-private partnerships. I think it's also really important as regulators that we stay open and available to the market. So here we meet with stakeholders all the time. We have an open door policy. I think many folks are surprised how open our door is, that when they send an email to a very generic sounding email, it's often I will pick up the phone and I will call and we will talk about what folks are building. It's so important that we stay as close as we can to the innovation so that we can understand how it works, where the risks are, and we can thoughtfully regulate. Innovation in California is really, really special. It's partly why I'm here and why I'm doing my public service now to give back. It's really special and we need to nurture it. And there are ways we can do it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, so from an unclaimed property perspective, we relied heavily on the private partnership.
Okay.
So it's tools that we don't have internally. And, the only way to kind of make it work is to really go out and try and find the best private group to help us run. But, ultimately the goal of unclaimed property, whether it's bringing anybody on board, it's about returning abandoned assets to individuals. So knowing that those exist out there, knowing that, if they're sitting dormant, we are going to try and get that information and, through our program, get it back to the people who've abandoned them. From that perspective, it's just something kind of that we had to do versus wanting to or not wanting to. Again, it's not necessarily the controller being in support of digital assets or not being in support of it. It's really just about identifying that they're abandoned and getting it back to them.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
I appreciate the mission driven. Treasurer?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm glad that DMV is embarking on this because we get a lot of questions like, how come we're the tech capital of the world, yet government doesn't use tech? Or how come it's taking 30 days to count the ballots when we're the tech capital of the world? And it's great. So my concern is the biggest asset that people have is their homes. And I know that there were tech companies that could essentially, if you sign up, anybody that goes down to your local assessor's office and tries to change the title or looks at your title, it'll give you like a warning. But is there any discussion about putting, people's homes so that, there's a lot of scams. When people get older, people pretend that they're someone or a relative and they go in, the title companies sometimes catch it, because they're like, well, where's your ID? Something doesn't sound right. But, eventually they'll get around the system. So is there any talk about, actually logging in, people's homes so that people it'll be harder to scam and change titles?
I can't talk what's happening amongst the county clerks across across California, but I can tell you what the rest of the world is doing.
Okay.
So the blockchain is great for decentralized access to your assets. So if you were to think of the world we live in today, where if you're sending information from one department to the other, there's data sharing agreements required from that department to the consumer. So there is a lot of point-to-point information exchange that happens. Blockchain is great for creating a decentralized place or a location to put in information that is, depending on how you implement it, is authoritative and can be made available to anybody who needs access to, such as the county clerks or the people who are sort of verifying the ownership of an asset. In our case, the vehicle. In the example you're talking about, a actual real estate property. Or anything else, right? Your birth certificate or anything else that can sit on and be accessible via certain privileges that you would provide. So that owner is the owner and the asset is the asset, and it's immutable, right? It has not changed. So in general, that's a very typical use case in Asia and Africa at this point in time. In the United States, there is, given the record keeping and the obsession over it, I think we do great there, but the access to that information, and because of that, the possible fraud because of lack of information is still there. The transparency that blockchain provides in some of the other countries, where the ownership is sort of malleable in the sense you're able to actually make that more deterministic and more available to anybody. So there's quite a few good news. There's quite a few examples in the world if California wants to draw from for real estate asset tracking as well. And also one more thing, county clerks are already dabbling with it with vital records. So they're very familiar with it and not afraid of this technology as an enabler for this transparency and fraud reduction tech.
Yeah, I heard some of them are putting birth certificates, for example.
That's right. So Sutter County, Riverside, and one more, which I
think it's
is escaping my
Placer.
mind, possibly.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah, just as we continue down this path of folks looking for these types of technologies and seeing them as something that's useful, clearly the controller's office sees that, DMV sees that. Is it the CIO who is, or is it DFPI? Who from the governor's office are we looking towards for guidance when it comes to these issues? Do we have a certain sense of who's helping guide this type of technology through the system?
A great question, and I'll need to get back to you on who is the leader of that. I focus on the regulation of the companies, but it's a great question. I can get back to you on it.
No, really appreciate that. But just as you were pointing out, there's so many different uses. We want to make sure that as the treasurer's office takes a look at uses for its purposes, want to make sure that we're falling into a rubric of regulation that makes sense for our state. And no offense to our county brethren, but want to also make sure that as our local governments also start to look, that we have accessibility as both ways, from the state and from the local.
Yeah, I do want to comment on that's an extremely important aspect because the county clerks, when they're looking at the technology, they do have, given that we are the consumer of it as vital records, 45% of all the identity verification is done through just the birth certificates. Another half is passports and such. So as they create their own individual implementations, the burden is on the state departments like DMV to then deal with the diversity of implementations. So it'll be interesting, but also very needed, much needed to sort of have, I wouldn't call it oversight, but guidance entity. I know from governor's office standpoint, GoBiz has been very interested in the work that DMV had done, especially around blockchain in 22-23 timeframe. Thanks.
So maybe just for all our panelists, just to wrap up, like we did last time, 30 seconds on if you could choose an area to focus state law or regulation on in this in this current time, what do you think still needs the greatest clarity as adoption of these technologies continues?
I would say for emerging technology, what we are showing with the digital financial asset law is it is very possible to regulate emerging technology and to do it in a way that preserves innovation and protects consumers and markets. And let's not stop here. There's more emerging technology that is in need of thoughtful regulation.
And in my case, clear guardrails around how we use the technology. We as in state entities would be able to take benefit of it, the necessary controls. For example, like I mentioned, NIST had certain compliance available and we adopted those, but that was our choice. The choice to use the proof of stake versus proof of work was our choice to be sustainable. But another entity may or may not have the necessary know-how or the right partners to be able to make some of those decisions. So it'll be good to have some of those guardrails and standards compliance requirements also in place. Thank
you. So from my perspective, I don't know that I'll talk so much about the laws, but as much as what I'm thinking about when we're running the program, and that is the security associated with holding the financial assets from PII to making sure that the assets aren't hacked or stolen or anything along those lines. So when I'm looking at running the program, that's what I'm most concerned about.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to our public sector panelists. Very much appreciate your time and your efforts here and all the good work you're doing at the state level. Thank you very much. We're going to just take 30 seconds and change out panels. Beautiful. So our third panel, we're going back to the private sector now. We talk about markets and money, some of our favorite topics here at the State Treasurer's Office. And we're going to get perspectives from financial institutions and fintech experts. We're going to explore blockchain technology and digital assets and how they're converging with, did you call it TradFi earlier? Okay, I'm going to call it traditional financial services for our audience. We'll discuss bankings, payments, tokenization, stablecoins, investment products, risk management. If we get to all those things, I'll be shocked, but I'm looking forward to trying. I'd like to welcome Adam Carson from JPMorgan Chase, who's working on the digital asset and blockchain solutions within one of our world's largest financial institutions, one of our partners here at the State Treasurer's Office. Anthony Pecore, who's the Director of Digital Asset Management at Franklin Templeton here in San Mateo, and a leader in tokenization and institutional digital asset investing. And Dr. Diogo Monica, who's a general partner at Haun Ventures, has been a recognized expert on digital asset infrastructure, stablecoins, and financial technology for years, and has been involved in a number of companies setting trends in this industry. So thanks for all of you for joining us today. Really appreciate it. I'm going to jump right in. We're going to maybe just to ask a question of each one of you just to get started, but feel free to take 5 or 10 minutes and give us your background, et cetera. So Adam, we're going to start with you. In the large financial institution space, we know you're exploring blockchain-based settlement and payment systems. What problems, beyond giving us a background on what you're doing, what problems are you also finding from at a big level bank like JPMorgan? What are you trying to solve, and how do you see traditional finance converging with blockchain-enabled systems?
Yeah, thank you very much. Just as a little background, I spent 7 years with Chase back from 2012 to 2019, focused on the emerging fintech and digital financial services space. I then moved into venture, where I worked at Point72 Ventures, focused on fintech, and started our digital asset and crypto venture fund. And I just rejoined Chase in January, one of the first hires on the Chase side of the business to focus on digital assets. JPMorgan has been deep in blockchain technology and digital assets for about a decade on the wholesale and institutional side. And on the retail side, we are just starting our efforts. So before I talk about some of the benefits, I think it's important just to hit on some of the inherent characteristics of digital assets that lead to those benefits. And we've heard of some of those spoken about today. But one of the core characteristics is sort of 24/7/365. So digital assets and blockchains don't turn off. We know there's bank holidays. We know that the banking system doesn't necessarily run on the weekends. And so that's one of the biggest differences. Another is sort of the instantaneous nature of the settlement. When payments are made or when transactions are made on a blockchain, things settle instantly, very different from traditional financial services. You often hear T+1, T+2 settlement. That means the money is not, settling in real time. So that's another big thing. Lastly, global. Blockchain rails are inherently global. And it's very different from the way that our financial rails are set up today on a country by country basis. So that leads to some of the benefits and some of the reasons why large banks like JPMorgan Chase are looking at blockchain as a new technology, a new innovation, essentially a new rail. On the institutional side of the house, those benefits lead to improved customer experience around moving money and assets in real time. So it comes down to price. You can reduce the cost to serve, and ultimately utility. On the consumer side of the house, we're really seeing just a pull from customers, right? Something around 15 to 25% of United States, adults are holders of cryptocurrency, and that skews towards the 40 to 50% when you talk about the younger generations. So there's just a demand coming from the market, and traditionally that's being served by crypto companies and increasingly by fintechs. The large financial institutions have sort of needed to wait until the regulation caught up before we could enter, but that's starting to happen. So when we talk about convergence between the digital asset space and the traditional finance space, I see it in three big aspects. The first is the blockchain rails were originally created for cryptocurrencies, right? A new type of asset, but we're increasingly seeing real world assets, whether that's tokenized money markets, tokenized treasuries, tokenized equities, sort of all asset classes moving on chain. So there's this convergence now that blockchains are serving both the sort of new cryptocurrencies, but also all these different traditional asset classes. The second convergence we're seeing is we used to have crypto companies on one side and we used to have traditional finance on the other, and they kind of lived in two different worlds. And more we're seeing those two worlds start to intersect and collide as more traditional financial services companies offer digital asset products and services. But at the same time, a lot of the traditional crypto companies are looking to get licensed and also offer traditional financial services products. One way to think about this is back 20 years ago when e-commerce started, there was really this big sort of difference between e-commerce and brick and mortar, and those are two very different things. And over the last 20 years, they've converged. It's now just commerce. It's hard to really draw that line, and a lot of players play in both. We see the same sort of convergence happening between digital assets and traditional financial services. The last piece of convergence I'll talk about is sort of more on the retail side and the customer experience side. We all have grown up with different account types. We have a checking account, we have a savings account, we have a credit card account, we have an investment account, and we have, right? It's multiple accounts. Beneath each of those account types, there's separate core systems, there's separate operations, there's separate pricing, there's separate everything. The digital wallet, which is the representation of sort of how a consumer interacts with assets on a blockchain, represents all of those in one unified experience. So you can hold your money, you can spend, you can invest, you can borrow, all from this one net new infrastructure. And it really collapses and converges all of the different account types into a single customer experience that likely will provide benefit and utility. I'll stop there for now.
Thanks, Adam. I'm going to turn to Tony, Anthony. You go by Tony or Anthony? Tony, thank you. I knew that. So tokenization has become one of the most discussed developments in finance, obviously. Can you kind of talk about it both practically and also from an institutional perspective, why folks are paying attention, but also how is Franklin Templeton approaching the technology broadly?
Thanks. Just honored here to be speaking with treasurer and deputies for the fourth largest economy in the world. Not say that lightly. Franklin Templeton is a $1.7 trillion asset manager, regulated by the SEC and numerous other related regulators around the world. Europe, of course, England, Middle East, more recently. So we do have an interesting perspective as all of regulators, large and small states are grappling with these issues. Many are the same issues. I have worked at Franklin Templeton for 23 years. 15 of those years was in fixed income portfolio management. Some of that even involved California municipal bonds, of which we have, I believe, 20 plus billion still. Over those years, my career has moved on from traditional finance, TradFi, into more emerging asset management opportunities for us. And that is what led me into digital assets. Franklin started down the path of digital assets in 2018, when we were introduced to digital ledger technology in a way that, and this is still important today to comment on, as there's the technology, the protocols, the blockchain, the distributed databases, however we would like to talk about it, provides some great utility. We've heard descriptions of that. And then there's Bitcoin. And let me just say that is an asset which exists because of all of the features of blockchains. But that's, I think, what we see is, well, it's an investable asset for one, but that's where certainly a lot of news and attention is around. There's also names you may know, ETH. That is the native token of Ethereum protocol. Ethereum protocol has many great uses. If you'd like to use it, you have to pay in something called ETH. There's a Solana protocol. Its native token is called SOL, S-O-L. If you would like to use the features of the Solana protocol, you have to pay essentially an SOL. We at Franklin, really through a R&D experiment, tokenized a money market fund in 2021. We did this in conversation and journeyed with the SEC through the prior administration. 80 phone calls, 80 meetings. They gained our comfort, gained confidence in what we're doing. And all we really did, the risk of oversimplifying it, was to use blockchain to act as a digital transfer agency. Job of a mutual fund or a job of a fund company is to have two sets of records. One, who owns the shares of the fund and what's in the fund. We tokenize the shareholder records. That is what the transfer agency does. This is our first exercise in tokenization. It's gone on to have some nice product market fit. Today we have $2.5 billion worth of money market fund, both private, public, and across 4 jurisdictions. Now, why? Why are we doing all this? Tokenization unlocks many of the, almost to repeat many of what the comments that Mr. Carson said. There's instantaneous settlement. There is the ability for others to know who owns what assets you own, if you've permissioned them. This allows perhaps better borrower lending possibilities for consumers, corporations, and the like. There is instant transferability. The real product market fit that we are finding is in collateral management. This gets away from consumers, but in financial transactions where company A wants to borrow from company B and there's collateral involved, both parties certainly need to be sure that the collateral is good and it is where it needs to be. And then perhaps if you need to change collateral hands or margin, money moves back and forth. Blockchain is a good way to do it. And T-bills, which are a large portion of what tokenized money markets funds are still pristine collateral. And this all makes for a very efficient, an increase in efficiency in just capital markets. We finally see, as we look ahead in our business as asset management, we really provide advice. Our clients, whether they be central banks, pension funds, or retail customers, they want to have portfolios with advice on whether asset A is worth holding for 10 years or asset B. We ultimately see, as Mr. Carson mentioned, people's accounts are going to collapse. We see the opportunity to offer advice in a collection of assets that make up individual or corporations' portfolios, and that advice can be delivered through tokenized products and in tokenized solutions. I don't think we use the word wallet today, but that's another way of saying that's where all of your assets are. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Tony. And for our third panelist, last but certainly not least, Dr. Monica. I know you'll give us a little background on what you've been doing for many years, and also maybe perhaps as we've heard about a lot of different digital assets, maybe talk a little bit about stable coins as well, because that's obviously a major focus of policy makers and regulators, and what kind of differentiates stable coins from other assets, why they're attracting so much attention. And then please give us some background on kind of how you view kind of traditional finance versus this emerging finance as you get photos.
Of course.
Thank you.
I was almost going to do this for the picture, but I didn't have time. Thank you for the question, and thank you for having me. Maybe I'll start by introducing myself a little bit and providing you context why I think the viewpoint that I bring to the table is relevant. First, I'll start with one of my roles. I'm a general partner at a venture fund called Haun Ventures. We invest in blockchain, in fintechs, regulated financial institutions. And so I spend a lot of time with the founders, with the people innovating in the space, a lot of them obviously in California, as you'd expect, and spend a lot of my time seeing what's actually on the bleeding edge. I myself am also a founder. I co-founded a company called Anchorage Digital. Anchorage was the first federally chartered bank in the United States to hold crypto. Our customers are BlackRock and some of the largest financial institutions in the world. Myself and my co-founder, Nathan McCauley, started the company because there were no institutional solutions that allowed these large institutions, like the colleagues that are here today, to actually come into the space. And we brought our many years of security and cybersecurity expertise. That is what I have my PhD on. 20 years ago, it wasn't particularly useful, but PhD in distributed systems and security turns out actually has utility in 2026 under this blockchain angle, which is distributed systems and security at the end of the day. And then finally, I'm also the chairman of Protocol, of an actual nonprofit foundation called Near Foundation that helps develop a blockchain protocol. So those are the three angles. I created a regulated federal bank that has tens of billions of dollars in custody today. I am an investor in the bleeding edge of founders in the space, and I'm also the chairman of a foundation and a nonprofit that helps bring this technology to the world at large. To the question that was posed around stablecoins, I think it is extremely important to first delineate the fact that not all crypto assets are the same. And we talk about blockchain in one breath, but the reality is that a stablecoin and Bitcoin could not be more different than one another. The place where they intersect are the fact that both of them are dependent on public ledgers for their existence. And a lot of the innovation that stablecoins are bringing to the world is the fact that, as my colleague here, Adam, mentioned, Mr. Carson, they bring the advantages of the public ledger, the global nature from day one, the programmability, the transparency, onto what really is, at the end of the day, a stablecoin, the representation of a dollar on a blockchain. That's ultimately what it is. It is very different from a crypto native asset like Bitcoin, like Ethereum, that was mentioned before. These could not sit two worlds apart. The reason why they're so interesting, though, is where Bitcoin is seen by the public at large as an investable opportunity, a stablecoin is on the exact opposite of the scale. It is supposed to represent a dollar. And it is much more akin to a checking account in terms of the day-to-day use that consumers make of it than a Bitcoin that actually has meaningful volatility on a day-to-day basis and on a year-to-year basis. The reason why stablecoins are so interesting is because they allow not just consumers outside of the United States to have easy access to the dollars, but they actually make much easier to do any kind of cross-border transaction. This is a very important point. It means that within the United States and within California, there may be uses for stablecoins, and surely there will be, that will use the 24/7 nature of the asset, the instant settlement nature of the asset to create improvements around certain flows. However, the place where they're the most important and they're most useful are really anywhere where there's a cross-border transaction, payment, pay in, pay out, etc. So the place where we're going to see the most in California are people sending their money back to their families in South America or in Mexico. Those are the corridors in which stablecoins are making the most meaningful difference in people's lives. We're talking about double-digit percentage points in terms of the difference, the money that actually gets back home. And we're also talking accessibility and candidly in self-custody, the ability of holding a wallet by just downloading it on the App Store without having to go through a bar of lots of questioning and lots of onboarding that traditional banks obviously have to meet from a regulatory perspective, and have accumulated many workflows over the years that could be friendlier and are actually hard to pass the bar of. So this is an important point that I wanted to bring. These assets are not the same. Stablecoins are so important because they are representation of the dollar. That means something very different when you're actually marketing them to people, which is why Genius Act was so important in establishing how they are to be backed, because they are being seen as an equivalent to a checking account. It is a place where I can safely hold my dollars. And I'm sure there are going to be questions about specifically the asset and the potential risks, but I wanted to end my intervention there.
So I have a couple questions. I know a couple of years ago, 4 years ago, speaking to Janet Yellen about digital assets, crypto, they weren't really interested in dealing with it, right? Is it a security? Is it, other type of assets? Like what is being discussed at the federal level right now about how to track it, how to get people to pay taxes on it when they sell it? Is there like a 1099 system that's in place now, or maybe you can just let us know?
Of course. Again, the conversations that were had initially were, we had never seen an asset like Bitcoin when it came to be about 15 years ago. There was nothing like it before. We had never been able to do true peer-to-peer transactions that actually moved value without an intermediary that we could rely on for compliance, KYC, transparency, tax reporting. And so it was natural that it took many years for us to catch up to this new type of asset that was just different. How do we tax it? Is it property? Is it not property? Is it a security? Is it a commodity? What is it? And how do we track it? And so from then, from 15 years ago plus to now, we live in a completely different world. There are many regulated financial institutions that have the capabilities and have built the platforms that allow them to meet, if not surpass, the actual same level of regulatory scrutiny and compliance that the traditional banks have had over the past many decades of the American banking system. So I feel like a lot of those questions have been answered. Of course, the industry doesn't stop, and every time something is somewhat settled, there's a new type of asset that comes along, which is the story then with stablecoins. Wouldn't it be great if we had a dollar that was native to the internet? I can send a picture back to my mother in Lisbon, Portugal instantly, but I could not send a dollar back to my mother instantly. Wouldn't it be great if we actually had a digital representation of the dollar that encapsulated this advantage of the internet? And that's the part of the reason why stablecoins existed. And then again, more questions actually come up. At this point, I feel like a lot of these questions have been settled for the years. Obviously, state by state basis, there's different conversations and different sensitivities to it, but a lot of these questions are answered. You have in the private sector many people that are experts in this, and me myself for almost 10 years. We've been operating a regulated institution over the past 6 under the OCC, as you know, the oldest banking regulator in the United States, as a federal chartered bank in the US, meeting all the regs and compliances that are necessary to move not just crypto assets like Bitcoin and Ethereum, and Solana, and Hyperliquid, but also obviously issuing stable coins in the United States of America.
But if you sell Bitcoin today, are they being taxed or tracked? Like, let's say you own a lot of Bitcoin and you're living in Nevada.
Correct. So on there are rules in the actual centralized exchanges, which is where the majority of consumers buy and keep their own Bitcoin, are already tracking Bitcoin. They're tracking tax lots. They're tracking the price at which somebody bought and the price at which somebody sold, and they're reporting it to the IRS. So it is very clear how this is taxed. Everybody has known for a long time, and the actual financial regulated institutions that hold the majority of this are already reporting to the United States what the tax should be.
I have one more question. So there was a bill, I don't know what happened to the bill, was it last year, where it would allow taxpayers to pay their tax bills with crypto. And my thing is, if it's a stable coin, okay, then we know how much it's worth. But if it's not, then why would we do that? Why don't we just ask them to cash out their Bitcoin and pay their property taxes or pay their income taxes or their sales taxes? Like, what's the thinking? Yep.
One, maybe a question for whoever introduced that bill. Would they have the state accept stock as tax payment? I don't know the answer to that question. Probably not. And I think a lot of what's been we've come to consensus on in the past 10 years about what are these digital assets, and there's so many. There's a spectrum of, there's that native token that we just talked about, that Bitcoin with its 50 to 70% vol, it's come down to a stable coin, to a digital representation of a dollar. Two totally different things. We have come to conclude that these native tokens, once they've reached a degree of, distribution around the world, we're going to call them commodities. If a token is controlled by a small number of people that are benefiting from its appreciation, it feels a little more securities-like. And that's what's on the Clarity Act is going to help solve, or we'll have some tests, I guess, a modern day version of a how we test, if I could be so bold there. That'll be I have to get a new word for it. But to the idea of, would the state accept Bitcoin, a 50 vol asset, to pay its taxes? Probably not. Would it, and could it accept stablecoin? I think it's a much more reasonable proposition, because that's really just saying dollars, perhaps with a little bit of an exchange fee to get back to dollars, but that's how we think about it.
I don't know the genesis of where that come from, but one might posture that originally, as Bitcoin was created, there was a way to move it peer to peer very simply and fast. And so people thought, hey, this could be a next way for global payments to work. There's some problems with that. There's the tax issue that every time you sell a Bitcoin, there's a taxable event. That's whether you sell $1 million or whether you sell $1, right? There's the regulation issue. And there's actually some speed and cost of the Bitcoin network. Bitcoin has moved more to an investable asset versus a payment rail, and that's where stablecoins have really come in. But there are still a lot of people who hold Bitcoin. It is easy to transfer, and there are a bunch of companies that have tried to make it useful for payments, both around the world and even here in the United States with companies like Square and PayPal, enabling merchants to accept Bitcoin. That doesn't mean the merchant has to hold the Bitcoin. There can be a conversion to fiat immediately, right? So the state could do that as well. You could accept Bitcoin as a form of payment and immediately convert that into dollars. But I think for a while it was considered a potential new payment rail, and that's why I think some of these type of things were introduced.
To your question, just one more note, it is, you're absolutely right. Why doesn't somebody sell and then settles in dollars? But ultimately, there's also a question of California as a state will have the capability of doing it cheaper, doing it at volume. And so it is just a convenience for me. If I'm holding my wealth already in this asset, why not send it to the state? The state does not need to actually take the volatility on their books. They can instantly actually get a quote from somebody that allows them to price it instantly, which is one of the advantages. A highly liquid asset like that can be sold 365 days out of the
Could
year.
do that, but then if I were to pay my bill if I were to pay my tax bill in an appreciated Bitcoin, I think I would be creating another taxable event for myself, which is a choice.
That's right. Just one more point that I think is just a historical point worth mentioning. Part of the ethos of Bitcoin was an alternative asset in an alternative financial system. And one of the characteristics that people assign to money is the ability of paying taxes in it. And so a lot of the folks that have been around in Bitcoin for a very long time have always felt like the ability to pay their taxes in Bitcoin has been one of the characteristics that they would have liked for the asset that they consider to be money. So historically, I just wanted to point that out.
I would just say we use terms like coin and currency, and it confuses, I think, the average consumer that this is more, it's not, to my knowledge, FDIC insurable. It's a commodity, like just as you pointed out, Tony, it's something like a stock that you can sell that has a variable value. What are as we look at stablecoin, that seems to be the one that has the most regulation self-imposed, be it around itself, that's similar to what we have with the state or the federal system. What are those rules that a state could pick up on, or there systems or laws that we could, as a state, put on the use of Bitcoins that would help ensure stability within those markets? Or would that sort of corrupt the initial intent of Bitcoin?
I think colleagues can chime in, but I think it's settled that Bitcoin is a commodity. It will be governed by the CFTC. So how state regulation intersects CFTC guidance, I think that's what I would look to. I see privately, I mean, my model is stable coins are a narrow bank, which is to say the liabilities of the issuer are the stable coins, and they should have perhaps even over collateralization, have maybe 1.05 times assets versus what's out there. It starts to just feel very bank-like to me. Genius Act, though, is certainly what is going to govern all of the stable coins. So.
Did you say the Genius Act?
Genius Act, yes.
Yeah, the Genius Act is essentially actually says who can issue and what is the backing for the assets. Ultimately, I think one of the points my colleague mentioned is very important, which is this idea that they can actually be seen as narrow banks. I think this is a really interesting point. Stable coins are safer than commercial banks. Stable coins are safer than regional banks. They do not lend out their assets. There is no credit. There is no kind of risk that they're taking on their balance sheet. They're not doing maturity transformation. They are holding to short-term treasuries and cash equivalents on the balance sheet. And so it is the same thing effectively as dollars on chain are one-to-one backed by a dollar on a traditional financial institution. This is a really interesting point that is worth pointing out.
I do have to step in here though, because while all Genius compliant stablecoins might have very clear rules and regulations associated with the backing of them, not all stablecoins are created equal as well. We heard about Luna Terra. There's probably 50 different permutations of different types of stablecoins with different types of assets backing them. And so you can't just say stablecoin. You have to say Genius compliant stablecoin. in the United States. That can, in some ways, be considered, I believe, a safe asset. You also have to remember that there are efforts like JPMorgan and other banks that are tokenizing deposits. That's simply a representation of a traditional deposit on chain that comes with all of the insurances and the FDIC insurance that a traditional deposit has. Both of these things will exist. The tokenized deposit, the Genius compliant stablecoin, and then there will be a world of other non-safe types of assets and stablecoins out there. But you can't just say stablecoin because there's a lot of different flavors of stablecoins.
So bring it back just for a moment, because I heard on one of the panels that I think they estimated 15 to 25% of, I think it was Americans, maybe it was Californians, are kind of involved in some sort of digital asset, but that 40 to 50% of a certain population under a certain age is participating. I'm kind of curious from all of your perspectives on kind of how do you view retail participation, which, as we all know, is fraught at some point, versus kind of this more cautious institutional approach, which makes some sense from an institutional perspective to move a little more slowly. But where do you think that gap converges eventually? Or what do you need for the gap to converge and this to become a more mainstream asset class and or payment enabled coin system?
Want to continue the taxonomy here. Digital assets, a tokenized statement of ownership. One can have a Bitcoin, which is, again, very volatile. It's a commodity. Good. One can have a tokenized ownership of a money market fund. This is 100% governed by securities law. It's a security, SEC regulated security. It just has a tokenized statement of ownership. We will see, and there already are examples of tokenized stocks, which is just to say there's a tokenized representation of SpaceX. So and maybe even that's a new flavor. That was a private company with a token which a person could own. So have access to a private company before it's in the public markets. There are, of course, there will be tokenized debt. We will soon see all assets of all flavors have a tokenized representation. So I think how retail customers want to build portfolios with whether it be the native token, Bitcoin, because they have an investment thesis of their own for maybe the next 10 years. That's wonderful. And where they would like advice, that advice exists. Or if they just want to have a token, have exposure to SpaceX before it goes public, that is, it's another opportunity that digital ledger technology affords them or can bring to them. How people would like to invest, we think is up to them. And we do recommend advice from time to time as people get older. I think that, that younger demographic, I think that 50%, we do know that today's 27-year-old crypto trader will be tomorrow's 45-year-old parent of two, and they may have a different risk profile. We're here for them throughout their journey.
I love how my colleague pointed at me when he said younger demographic. I'm very proud of this. I'm pushing on 40 now, so very excited about this. One thing that I would say is the following. Obviously, so far, we've talked about retail participation on the investment side. That exists and it's there. I think one of the most interesting things that is emerging, though, it is retail participation without knowing they're using these types of technologies on the back end. That's actually where the majority of the impact will come. Entrepreneurs right now with their laptop in 15 minutes can create a neobank that takes dollars, invests dollars, pays dollars, all through stable coins that they can permissionlessly interact with on these public ledgers. That has never been possible in the history of the United States, for you to interact with money and create products that use money in a self-custodial way. And this is actually something that is happening pretty quickly, and it's changing a lot of the way that retail interacts with what we call the dollar, primarily outside of the United States. Part of the reason why the United States that has not been as relevant is because we're pretty well served. All of us have access to dollar very easily. There's very good, trustable institutions. They're very modern, and that give us access to all of these. But primarily outside of the United States, this is happening. And so the rest of the world is now starting to interact with dollar through stablecoins without knowing they're interacting with public ledgers and crypto and these rails. And that's kind of a really interesting source of impact.
Yeah, I'll just double down on that. From a consumer experience, like blockchain used to be very technically complicated and scary, especially actually doing things on chain. And some of the early crypto companies started to make it easier and easier, but there was this whole world of self-custody where you had to write down your seed phrase and you had to sign transactions, and it was very technical, even for someone who's been in the space for a long time. It was intimidating. One of the things that some of the financial institutions and fintechs and companies have done is really abstract away the complexity and make it look like a traditional payment or a traditional investment, where you don't need to know your seed phrase and you don't need to sign blockchain transactions and you don't need to know what chain you're operating on. It's as simple as buying and selling a stock. It's as simple as making a payment through a fintech app, except now it's a stable coin instead of $1. Now it's faster with lower fees. And so one of the reasons why you see a lot of the brokerage firms and a lot of the fintechs and a lot of the payment firms integrating this is because, one, it can reduce costs, two, it can make the customer experience better, and three, there's consumer demand. Part of the reason they're able to do this so quickly is because there are a set of infrastructure companies, such as Anchorage, and there's a lot of scaled infrastructure companies up and down the entire stack, from custody to trading to stablecoin issuance. They're regulated institutions now that are not teeny startups, multi-billion-dollar startups, and they're making it easy for large banks, large brokerages, large payment companies, cross-border payment companies, and fintechs to integrate digital assets into their ecosystem without having to build everything themselves. So this sort of digital assets infrastructure and the scaling of that has made it easier to integrate, quicker to launch products. You don't have to build everything yourselves. And even the banks, as we look into this, we're trying to make the decision, do we want to build some of this technology ourselves and own, or do we want to rent and use partners for this to get to market quickly? So those are decisions that are being made by most of the large financial institutions.
Looking down on my colleagues, we've been hogging the microphones down here. Good.
Well, I just want to say, some of the Latino grocery stores, they actually have a place where people can come in and do the Western Union transfers. And that's been a complaint that I've heard, is that they take a lot of money, these money transmitters, out of the amount they want to transfer. So, I think listening to all of you, that this is an opportunity to kind of cut out the middleman, not have to, pay these intermediaries, and, their dollar will go further, sending it back home to their, their loved ones. So I don't know if anybody's looking at those, those type of transactions, like the Western Union type or whatever, the MoneyGram is out there. And if there's anybody that's in
There
that
are
space.
plenty of startups that are now several years old that are addressing that opportunity.
Well, in addition, through early warning systems, the bank consortium, we have Zelle, which is person-to-person payments in the United States, that they've announced Zelle International and the ability to do that. Part of Zelle International will be leveraging blockchain rails and stablecoins. So it's not just the Western Unions and the MoneyGrams, but all of the banks part of the Zelle network here in the United States are now going to be working internationally with the global banks to make this work faster and cheaper for customers.
Yeah.
Even the Western Union themselves has a stablecoin now, so it's pretty interesting to note.
Who owns Zelle?
Zelle is owned by Early Warning Systems, which is a consortium of the largest banks.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on those types of patterns or trends that you see that the either state treasurer's office or California should be keeping a pulse on around digital assets? By the way, really quick, I love the analogy around brick and mortar. I have to say, worked way back when for a company called Cybercash. We probably needed Haun Ventures. But so I love the conversation, but just so we have a better idea of where everything is moving, because there's huge benefit to consumers, but it is very complex for them to understand, whether it be around education or protection or.
So is this using digital assets for the treasury or for?
Just meaning where we should be tracking, what we should be paying attention to in the immediate future. Around the broader conversation, it doesn't have to be digital assets.
Generally, I think one of the things that the industry has done now is there's a lot of regulated financial institutions operating, and I think that needs to continue being the case. I think regulated financial institutions already have oversight, and so if say a company that is a new company wants to support this type of corridor, say from California to Mexico to send money back, I think it being regulated is one of the ways in which people can actually make sure that the dollar that they're seeing, even though it's a stable coin, ultimately ends up being a dollar on the other side, and that all of the care is being taken with their money. So I think that's one of the most important portions here, is to make sure that we're still following the same paths of making sure that these companies are regulated and have oversight.
I think over the next few years, we're going to see a proliferation of new stable coins. We already are continuing to see new announcements for new branded coins. So there's going to be branded money all over the place, and there's going to be education around it that needs to be done. There are going to be clearinghouses established where you can trade one branded money for another branded money. That will come eventually. But I think the key for the state is making sure that the digital asset companies that are operating here are using Genius compliant stablecoins.
Thank you.
To that point, do you see consolidation coming in this industry at all, or is the decentralization the point? Because I mean, I think when you think about AI as an example, it seems to all be funneling up to a few companies, right? Is the same thing going to occur, or has it occurred to any extent in blockchain or digital assets for that matter?
Yeah, I'll start with one thing. So the whole point of the industry is for it to be decentralized. And so there's a lot of decentralized blockchains themselves. But curiously enough, stablecoins are extremely centralized. There are two issuers that effectively dominate the whole issuance of stablecoins. All of the over $300 billion of dollar-denominated issuance, the majority of it is held by Tether, which is an offshore, non-regulated issuance of dollar equivalent. Stablecoin under the definition that we've been using, which are Genius Act stablecoins, they would not qualify as a stablecoin. That's important. In the United States, we have USDC, which is issued by a company listed in the United States called Ciccolo, and that is making moves to be regulated under Genius Act, and that would be a traditional stablecoin. And those two just account for all of the volume. It's also curious that for all of the issuance of stablecoins in the whole world, and here I mean in the general sense of regulated, non-regulated, 99.9% are dollar denominated. So it's extremely important to mention this point, which is stablecoins have been a way to expand the reach of the United States dollar outside of the United States. And that's extremely good for our country to have the world be more dependent on dollars and have more trade be done in dollars. So I want to point that out, that there is an interest here from a national security perspective in having these technologies succeed much far outside of our own state.
As long as our dollar remains stable.
They're all backed by T-bills, which is national debt.
Yeah, they're all national debt. So what's happening when there's demand for stablecoins internationally is people are literally buying our debt. And so they're bringing interest down, right? And so that's actually highly beneficial. And by the way, the backing of those T-bills and those deposits are done in American banks. And so ultimately nothing leaves the United States. It's just really these representations just expand the reach of the dollar, which I think is, strictly extremely good.
Outside of stablecoins, there is also consolidation amongst the value of the crypto market cap amongst the top 5, top 10. It's highly concentrated in Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, and the other 2 or 3. Even though there's millions of tokens that have been created, very few of them hold their value over time or have any value compared to some of the large ones. So we do have consolidation. I think at the infrastructure level, there is good distribution of a lot of custodians and a lot of different infrastructure providers. That's a good thing. And on the distribution side, you think of the amount of diversity we have in different financial services. We think that that's a good thing. Competition is a good thing. They'll continue to be amongst the fintechs, the crypto companies, the traditional financial services. So really the consolidation is right now in the assets themselves, but not the infrastructure or the distribution.
Really interesting. Thank you. So I know we're running out of time here, but I wanted to give all of you a chance to add another minute. And as we did on the other panels, coming back to kind of the state, where should the state be focused in your opinion, and in your space, if at all, going forward, both through policy or law for that matter?
I could start. One of the things I spent a lot of time is educating the executives at JPMorgan Chase in this space. I think it's critically important to move the conversation from cryptocurrency to digital assets. And when you say cryptocurrency, usually that is, in some ways a new asset type, and people think trading, they think speculation, they think margin, they think leverage, right? It's just about this sort of day trading thing when you say crypto. The next word is trading. When you move the mindset shift to digital assets, you're talking about digital money, stable coins and tokenized deposits. You're talking about tokenization of funds and treasuries and equities and other assets. And then the cryptocurrencies is one piece of the digital assets. And you're no longer just talking about trading and investing. You're talking about payments. You're talking about borrowing. You're talking about financial services. And so as the state continues to talk, as we continue to educate customers, this mental shift from crypto to digital assets is very important.
That's why it's called blockchain and digital financial assets. We get it.
We've heard lots of great answers today as that question's been posed to all the panelists. I think an interesting question to consider is on these lines of what if the state of California were to take stablecoin as receipt for tax payments? Another variation that might be, what if California were to issue a tokenized bond? So the bond is only on chain. Another variation of that might be, what if California were to issue a bond and receive stablecoins? So normally you issue a bond and you receive dollars and off you go. But what if we find there are a lot of investors around the world with piles of stablecoins that would like to lend them to the state of California? What world would that be? What needed to be to support that type of capital formation?
Can California create its own stablecoin?
Wyoming has created its own stablecoin, and California should hop in.
Okay, we're going to look at that, John.
Yeah, on my side, I would just generally not necessarily create your own stablecoin. There's a lot of stablecoins out there. I'm not sure if we need yet another one, but it is a path forward. One of the things to think through, and generally I'm hearing a lot of curiosity about this. So I think the state continuing to come from a place of curiosity of where these technologies can apply. I think at its most basic, it is true that these technologies can provide a lot of efficiency, can provide a lot of transparency, and are technologies that in general could actually benefit the state quite dramatically from, if you're looking for efficiency. I still receive refunds and checks. I could actually just give you a stablecoin address that is properly KYC'd at a financial institution to receive my deposit instantly. Same thing for tax payments. Cannot pay my taxes on Saturdays and Sundays. That's generally when I want to pay my taxes on the weekend. And so it would be great for the state to receive maybe the taxes before. All these things are just in some cases, small efficiency gains, and in certain cases, very large efficiency gains, depending on where they're applied. So my ask would be continue to be curious, like you are clearly, about the technology and where it can actually can be used.
Great. Okay, well, thank you all to the panelists. I think I definitely learned a lot. I just posted about that July 1st deadline because I don't think people, government is really good at posting things on our website, but not very good at letting people know that there's a deadline coming or, they should be looking at our website. So thank you all for today's, sharing your expertise and perspectives. Also want to thank everyone who joined us in person and online. Blockchain and digital financial assets remain among the most rapidly evolving areas of technology and finance. As we've heard today, these innovations present both opportunities and challenges. They raise important questions about consumer protection, financial inclusion, efficiency, privacy, market stability, and the future role of government and financial institutions. While many questions remain unanswered, one thing is clear. These technologies are increasingly becoming part of broader conversations about commerce, payments, investment, and public services. California has long been a leader in innovation, and we have an important responsibility to ensure that innovation develops alongside appropriate safeguards, transparency, and public trust. Today's hearing is part of that ongoing effort to shed light on these issues in the interest of supporting good policy and outcomes. I'm grateful to our panelists, stakeholders, and agency partners for contributing to a thoughtful and informative discussion. And to all of you in the audience and online, thank you again for joining us today. This hearing is now adjourned, and it will be online soon. Thank you.